Everybody knows Terry, but just for the sake of introduction, Terry is a highly regarded senior correspondent for CBC News, and he's reported for decades from over 50 countries on most of the major events that happened around the world. But what we're really grateful to him for is meticulously researching and reporting on the Khalistan project, both in his book form, but as well as through media, and to ask the hard questions that many people were not asking, either through ignorance or because they didn't want to. So, his book, Blood for Blood, the Global Khalistan Project, absolutely meticulously researched, wonderful book. Um, I suggest everyone please read that book. Suggest it for your local libraries, your reading clubs, because it's one of the best pieces of investigative journalism out there. But I think with everything happening right now, a lot of people are realizing that it's not dead and gone yet, the Khalistan issue, and we wanted to hear more about it, especially about how it relates to Pakistan. And we all knew about the Pakistan relation, but Terry has done a lot of research in that area. But also, how has that relationship evolved between Khalistan and Pakistan? So that's kind of where we want us to start, Terry, if that's okay with you.
Fine with me, yes. You want to?
Before you start,
go ahead.
Terry, just one minute. Just let me set some ground rules. Like we said, Terry will be starting off with the predetermined topics. Then we'll have a small panel discussion. Then we'll open it for Q&A. Please be patient. And also, please share the space with anyone who might be interested to listen. And this is a recorded space. It will be available offline as well. You can share it on other social media platforms as well. So with that, let me hand it over to Terry. And let me invite Puneet as well as Priyanka to the stage. Welcome, Puneet and Priyanka. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Well,
please.
thank you. Thanks for the idea and for the invitation. I won't try to exhaust all the topics that were suggested to me. I'll just comment briefly on each, and then you can take it wherever you want to go. The questions are always more interesting than the prepared remarks anyway. So let's start where you suggested the Pakistani involvement now and then. As most people know, I think the Khalistan cause has always depended to a significant extent on what I call the essential additive, namely Pakistani support. Somebody has to support it, because you can't dash across the border, create mayhem inside India, and then run back across the border if you're not going to be greeted on the other side of the border, on the Pakistan side. There isn't anywhere else that Pakistani militants could have found shelter, safe haven, weapons, training on those weapons, medical care, and so forth during the heyday of the Khalistani armed insurgency throughout the decade of the 1980s and the early 90s, ending, I suppose, about roughly in 1993, when the movement was basically crushed. Pakistan, I think, finds that support for the Khalistan movement convenient for its own strategic reasons, not for the same reasons that some minority of Sikhs support it, but no, for their own reasons. It's not because they yearn for the Sikhs to breathe free. Good grief, look at how they treat Sikhs inside Pakistan. Ask yourself why the population of Sikhs in Pakistan has been plummeting for a couple of decades now. Rather, Pakistan is out to bleed India, traditional policy of Pakistan, to get revenge for the 71 war, to cut off India's land access to Kashmir and so forth. I won't say much more about that, except to say that this support is sometimes disputed as though, oh, no, this is nonsense. No, it's all entirely indigenous. It's got nothing to do with Pakistan. Oh, really? Just consider one brief example. And that is the example of Talwinder Singh Parmar, the leader of the Air India bombing of 1985, the Kanishka bombing. He planted the bombs in Canada, where he was a citizen, as most people know. He fled the country then to live where? In Pakistan, where he was welcomed and helped. And he was finally shot dead on a mission inside India in Punjab in October of 92. And he died in the company of 5 other men, 2 of whom were ISI agents. Their identities were confirmed by the Pakistani government, which said they were tourists who happened to have a rocket launcher in their car, along with an antique machine gun, grenades, AK-47s, and so forth. And by the way, the senior ISI of the 2 ISI guys in the party of 6 who died alongside Parmar, he was the one carrying the money, a thick wad of US $100 bills. So don't tell me that, no, this is all a myth. The Pakistani involvement with the Khalistan movement is a myth. I don't think so. You die alongside a guy, you know him pretty well. Now, the Pakistanis in the present, that was going back to 92. I'm jumping forward a few decades really quickly, just to keep it moving. Today, of course, Pakistani missions overseas continue this policy in a slightly more subtle way. They team up, for example, at overseas missions with Khalistanis to rent a bus and go protest at the Indian High Commission. Pakistan, and together, they'll fly flags and say Khalistan Zindabad, and back on the bus and off they go. Pakistan also takes its whatever chances it can get to recruit for the Khalistan cause among Sikh pilgrims using the Kartarpur corridor to visit holy sites in Pakistan. And in the present day, I would say that Pakistan is in one sense declining in its capabilities because it's a mess. It's mired in dysfunction and in debt, so that it's been captured by China. But in another sense, Pakistan is also increasing in the threat that it poses for the same reason. I mean, it is not less dangerous as a client of China, indeed, almost a wholly owned subsidiary of China, than it used to be as a more independent actor. So that crucial element in the Khalistan cause, that continues, the support of Pakistan. There has to be somewhere, and Pakistan fulfills that role. And I'm not sure that the Khalistan movement could ever have mounted an armed insurgency without the safe refuge afforded by Pakistan. Now, quickly moving on to Canada, as everyone knows, a very important role in the Khalistan movement. And this continues today because of the exceptional and quite baffling, I think, success of Khalistani propaganda in a country where you would expect the opposite to be the case after the utter disgrace of the Air India bombing of 1985. You wouldn't expect a movement that did that. You would expect that pointless and brain-dead massacre of innocents would leave no room in Canada for any sympathy for the Khalistanis. But look at what happened very recently when Amritpal Singh, who, as you know, is the new star of the movement, a kind of Bindranwale 2.0, he attacked and invaded a police station in Punjab, just on the outskirts of Amritsar, a couple of weeks ago. And he attacked the police station to spring one of the members of his private militia from jail. Now, if such a thing happened in Canada, and that is an armed challenge to the state, such as we had, for example, in the October crisis in Quebec years ago, which was followed by Pierre Trudeau's invocation of what was then called the War Measures Act. Well, if you did try to pull a stunt like that in Canada, there would be hell to pay. And there was in that case. But instead, when this happened with Amritpal Singh and he made his escape, instead, MPs, members of parliament from all the main parties in Canada, sprang to their keyboards to cry and moan at the terrible abuse of civil liberties by the Indian state. There were Liberals, MP called Randeep Sarai, there was a deputy leader of the Conservative, the official opposition in Canada, there was Tim Upal, And definitely, of course, the NDP leader, the leftist leader, Jagmeet Singh, on whose goodwill Canada's present government depends, by the way, because he's in a kind of deal with the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau. All of these MPs complained bitterly on Twitter about the heavy hand of the law. But they didn't complain about the heavy hand of Amritpal Singh and his little personal army attacking a police station. This is extraordinary, in my view. Jagmeet Singh, for example, gravely recalled the extrajudicial executions by the Punjab police in the crackdown on the Khalistan insurgency 30 years ago. But he said not a word about the thousands of extrajudicial executions by Khalistani death squads in the same period. I mean, it's as though those deaths didn't happen or didn't matter. And this kind of blatantly fake misinformation is key, I think, to the Khalistan movement's revival today in the online world, where this kind of misinformation flourishes, and also in the current referendum campaign, which has coincided with these events in Punjab to turn up the heat. That's why we're doing this space
So,
today. And if I'll just mention the incredible collision with reality that is evident in the fact. I don't know how much Indians know about this, for example, that the outfit leading the referendum effort today says that it's all about democracy. It's about ballots, not bullets, to quote the head of Sikhs for Justice, Patwant Singh Panoon. But simultaneously, Panoon also announced that the Canada headquarters of the referendum campaign would be named in honor of, guess who, the Air India bomber, the great hero Shahid by Talwinder Singh Parmar, Canada's worst ever mass murderer, who was chosen as literally the poster boy for the referendum campaign. And by the way, another mass killer, Harjinder Para, he was the poster boy for the voting in Mississauga, and the assassins of Indira Gandhi were the poster boys for the voting in Australia. In other words, they just can't help themselves. It's this kind of open and defiant and threatening thinking, if thinking is the word, maybe it isn't, uh, uh, which now infects the Khalistan movement, even as it claims to espouse democracy. They're stuck in the past. Now, it's no wonder, finally, that I'd say that the support for the Khalistan movement is pitifully feeble where it counts, not in the diaspora, but in Punjab, where most of the world's Sikhs live. And that leads me to just one final word by way of introduction about the way in which the Indian government has, to a degree, in my opinion, undermined its own cause by banning the referendum in India, by criminalizing the whole thing. And I do know it's unconstitutional to break up the country in India, but I'm not bound by the Indian constitution. And I think that if you don't give the separatists an excuse for a weak showing in the referendum, the excuse being government repression, and if you instead let it happen, they'd be like the dog that caught the car. The separatists would lose by an embarrassingly wide margin. And certainly, if you look at the, I would say, pitiful showing of the separatists in recent Punjab elections, that's pretty convincing. I mean, it was what 2.5% in last year's
that's
election,
right.
and less than 1% in 2017. It was 0.3%, something like
That's
that.
right.
It was absolutely pitiful, microscopic level of support. And that same lack of support from the millions of Sikhs in Punjab, I think, would also convince those Canadian politicians and Germans and Australians and Italians and British politicians who seem to be patsies for the Khalistanis. Oh, the poor abused Khalistanis. That low level of support in Punjab, if fairly revealed, would show them they're backing the wrong horse. And that might lead to a better relationship, for example, between Canada and what is a massively important country. Anyway, I went on a bit long, but just by way of those are a few different lines of thought that are perhaps worth talking about.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Terry. It's wonderful that you hit upon most of the major points. One thing I wanted to follow up with you is the financing, the money and the arms that were supplied by Pakistan There's a lot of documentation that you provided for, in the 80s and 70s, how Pakistan was providing the financing for it. But what do you think is the trail right now with that? Is there a trail?
Well, I'm not persuaded that there is. That there is certainly a continuing contribution by Pakistan to diplomatic cover, to hosting prominent Khalistanis within the borders of Pakistan. Chala is an example. But I'm skeptical that the whole thing is financed by Pakistan for two reasons. First, because Pakistan doesn't have any money. That is a slight problem if you're trying to finance revolutions in other people's countries. And second, because the Khalistanis don't seem to be short of their own money. In my view, they're financing themselves. I mean, if just go look for a video of a truck rally in Brampton, Ontario, in favor of the Khalistan referendum. Take a look at the trucks. Some of those are $50,000. Those are very nice, shiny trucks with all mod cons. And I don't think that the movement has that much trouble coming up with money. Besides which, the reason it has done so well in the last few years is by doing something that is free. They've been campaigning online. They're organized online. They're all over Facebook. They have a hard time keeping a Twitter account. Anytime that Puneet sets up a Twitter account, it seems to last a matter of days. The Indian government insists that Twitter take it down, and Twitter does take it down. But they're still all over Facebook. They've been very active online. And let's face it, you don't need to worry about where the money's coming from. I mean, all you need is a laptop and a keyboard.
So, Terry, one thing I want, you mentioned this, the referendum in Punjab, and Shiromani Akali Dal Amritsar part, the SADA, SADA or SADA, is actually basically has this Khalistani part in their manifesto, and they are the ones who stand for election every time and get like 1% or less than 1% consistently. And the only reason they got about 2% or something the last election was because of the murder of, or the death. It wasn't a murder, but it was the death of one of their, young rabble rousers, which many say is orchestrated by them itself. Who knows? But so, there is a political avenue as well that they could, they, if they had support in Punjab, would show up. But unfortunately for them, it's not showing up. So I think that should answer their question about it.
Yeah, I think that the weak showing of the only separatist party run, the splinter group led by Simranjit Singh Mann that you're describing, really the only party that has been run. They have been allowed to run. They don't espouse armed struggle. They've been free to run, and their pitiful performance, as I said earlier, there's a message in that. That should help Canadian and German politicians and Australian politicians. That should enable them to understand that, as I said earlier, that they're backing the wrong horse.
So, with the things that are happening right now, Terry, a lot of, you alluded to this massive misinformation campaign and the diplomatic cover that Pakistan and ISI, and especially their Kashmir desk is, which is now a bit redundant for them, is actually providing for Khalistan. Um, how is this something that a Canadian government or any government agency can battle? I mean, the massive social media platforms are open and free for all, and disinformation is something that you're not really able to tamp down on. You can ban
Well,
some of it, but it's not
allow
able
allow
to.
if it's okay, allow me to disagree with you. I think that the Western governments, democratic governments, and publics, all of us are perfectly free to exercise our own freedom of speech. If we're going to allow and forgive and tolerate freedom of speech for the Khalistanis, as we do and as we should. I'm in favor of them having freedom of speech. Let them drive down the street with a flag saying Khalistan Zindabad. Fine with me. There's no violence, no breach of the law. That's okay. If we're going to allow that, then what about our own freedom of speech? What about our own governments? Where are the politicians who are going to stand up and say, you know what? I am not going to play the traditional vote bank politics, and I am not going to come to your annual Vaisakhi parade and smile and wave while the floats go by in the parade, carrying life-size portraits garlanded with gold tinsel of gun-toting Sikh martyrs and assassins and mass murderers. I'm not going to come to that parade. That's wrong. I'm going to denounce it. Instead, what you have is cowardly politicians saying, oh, I didn't see that float. I've got an urgent meeting I have to run. I can't answer the question. I don't understand really what you're getting at. Oh, they find ways to avoid the topic for fear of alienating what is actually a very small minority of the vote. They're chasing these votes because people come to them and say, well, you know, we speak for the Sikhs. This is the central scam of Khalistani propaganda. That if you criticize Khalistanis, you're anti-Sikh, as though all Sikhs are Khalistanis. Well, look again at the voting figures in Punjab, and you have 98% of them disagree with you. 98% want nothing to do with it. So my question is, in answer to your question, is where are the Western politicians who are ready to stand up and say, look, we've had enough of this. You are you are holding up as great martyrs. I mean, in Surrey, British Columbia, which is an important part of, is the second largest city in British Columbia. They have a life-size portrait on the outside of the Gurudwara for all to see of Talwinder Parmar. Shaheed by Talwinder Parmar, a hero, a model for Sikh youth, Canada's worst ever mass murderer. Where are the politicians who are willing to step up and say, you're free to propagate this kind of information? I've got something to say too.
Terry, I want to ask you about a recent incident that occurred in Vancouver, where a Khalistani supporter seemed to be mentally ill to some extent. I mean, he is by default if he's a Khalistani. He walked outside of a Starbucks and stabbed a Canadian citizen to death in broad daylight, right?
I saw the video. It was horrifying.
So this is no longer just an Indian problem or a Punjab problem. This is coming to the forefront of the well-being of Canadian citizens. And you being a Canadian citizen, how do you feel about that? And what is the mood of the general populace, the Canadians?
Well, I'll tell you how I feel about it. I feel that I am not ready to endorse your presumption that this was a Khalistani. I've seen no evidence of it. I've seen instantly that was claimed, suspiciously quickly that was claimed. Oh, well, this guy was seen at some demonstration against the Indian High Commission. Oh, really? Well, in that case, he crossed 3 time zones in a hurry because the Indian High Commission is in Ottawa, in Ontario, in the Eastern time zone, and British Columbia is on the West Coast. I mean, it's a vast country. So I found that very unpersuasive, and it hasn't been based in any evidence that I've seen. If I see evidence, then I'm happy to comment on it, but I don't see any evidence that this murder was committed by a Khalistani. It was committed by a crazy guy. I can concede that. We all can. But I've seen no evidence that it had anything to do with Khalistan.
So, Terry, a follow-up question on that, and there have been videos coming out from Gurudwaras in the West. The one I saw was from the US, and US, I think both from Sacramento and one from the East Coast, where young children are, they're American citizens and they're being indoctrinated, about taking out Hindus, and they have swords in their hands, and this kind of indoctrination. I mean, at this point, the idea that they would come to India and wage their battle is not happening. So who are these people fighting? Is it the Indian Americans at this point? Like, I mean, that isn't that concerning that there is an indoctrination of young children happening in Gurudwaras. Um,
Yes, I think you put your finger on a very important point. I mean, where do they find these kids who show up at the Indian consulate in Melbourne, Australia, smashing windows, shutting the place down, as they did recently for a day? Where do they find these young Khalistanis, or they say they're Khalistanis? Maybe they're just Khalistanis for the day, for money. I've heard that rumored. Who show up to smash up the Indian consulate in San Francisco? Or where do they find these young men? I suppose it's young men. We don't know, who have been spray painting Hindu temples in and around Toronto, Ontario, what, 4 times in the last 7 or 8 months? Spray painting Khalistan Zindabad on Hindu temples. Where do they come from? Well, they're not old enough to remember the heyday of the Khalistan movement in the 1980s and the early 90s. They grew up in the West. They know nothing about all of that. They have been indoctrinated at the Gurudwaras, which have been taken over in an organized fashion by hardline Khalistanis. Not all of us, many of them disagree. They want nothing to do with everything we're talking about today, has not infected the Sikh community. The Sikh community as a whole has an excellent reputation in this country and indeed in many others for being hardworking people. They've done very well in the professions, in the bureaucracy, in all kinds of fields. But these kids are coming from somewhere. The kids that are causing the problems and pulling out swords in a Gurdwara in California, they're coming from somewhere and they're learning somewhere. So where is it? Well, every time they go to the Dashmesh Darbar temple, to that particular Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia, they can't get in without walking underneath the life-size poster of Talwinder Parmar. Guess what they're teaching in that temple? They're teaching that the movement goes on, the fight goes on. For example, as recently as 2 weeks ago, Gurpatwant Singh Panun, the leader of Sikhs for Justice, was giving the Australian media quotes like, well, Sikhs have been suffering an ongoing genocide by the Indian state right from the time of Indira Gandhi up to the present time under Narendra Modi. So there's an ongoing genocide, he says, of the Sikhs in India. And you have to ask yourself the question, if that's true, how come millions of Sikhs in Punjab who live in India haven't heard about it and haven't noticed this genocide? Answer, it is fiction. And that is extremely concerning. The young people, I mean, I was told by a friend of mine whose father was going to be a witness against the Air India bombers and was murdered before he could testify. So this guy knows a little bit about what he's talking about. His son told me the story of how he encountered a young girl. He thinks she was about 12 years old, and she asked him a question. And the question was, why do you call the Air India bombers, why do you call them terrorists when they're really heroes? And he was just flabbergasted. And he looked at her and he said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean heroes? What about the victims? What about the victims' families? Do you ever think of that? And she said, oh, I didn't think of that. So that is what is being taught. That's just one example. There are others. That is what is being taught, that this was a good cause, and the guys who blew 331 completely innocent civilians out of the sky were good guys. Those were our guys. Those were our heroes. That is the heart of the problem. And your question has put your finger right on it.
So Terry, you mentioned Panun and Sikhs for Justice. I think the referendums servers have had is supposed to have been found to be hosted in Karachi in Pakistan.
Yes.
So I mean, it's quite obvious the connection that they have to Pakistan and the ISI. and their coverage. But just coming back to this whole indoctrination, there's a whole aspect of not just indoctrination of the children who are growing up, second generation, third generation Western citizens, who actually, are willing to whitewash, the second largest aviation terror in the world, which killed, 329 innocent people, including children, because of religious indoctrination. And how are Western governments or anybody else, any kind of sane organized civic society, able to fight that? How do we stop that?
Well, you're not asking. I wish that I was in a better position to answer that question because it is important. And I don't know the answer. I'm not an expert in how the West should counter disinformation of all kinds, whether it be Russian or Chinese or Khalistani. I address myself to one area that I do know a bit about, and that is the public sphere, meaning by which I mean politicians who are before the public, giving interviews, making statements, running for office, and I heartily recommend that they take a much more aggressive stand in saying that they denounce this kind of hero worship of terrorists, for example. But it's more subtle than that. I mean, for example, I cited a moment ago the tweets that were put out by members of all three main parties in Canadian politics, fretting about the terrible heavy hand of the police in Punjab, faced with this armed militia, as private army of Amritpal Singh. I didn't see any pushback. I mean, I think one of the tweets was somehow disappeared or taken down, but then reappeared. But I saw no storm of opposition in Canada because remember, I said all three main parties. So no one party is going to go public criticizing the other party for being patsies for Khalistanis because they do it too. If they're all doing it, there's no percentage in any one party denouncing another. See what I mean? That's the political calculus: is that we're all doing it, and we're all trying to get the same votes. I'm not going to give up those votes to the other guy by criticizing Khalistanis in public. But your question is more wide ranging than that. You're talking about how governments, as a whole, should counteract this propaganda and stop 12-year-old girls learning that airplane bombers are heroes. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what governments can do. I only know they should do something.
So Terry, follow up for that is, how many votes are we talking about? If they go in, if one party says they are no longer going to side with Khalistanis, but the Sikh Canadians, and their concerns are paramount, and if they cut off that Khalistani vote line, how impacted would they be? Is that
Well, it's
really a
not as
big?
expensive. It's not as expensive politically as they imagine it to be. To answer you directly, I mean, in Canada, we're talking about probably half a dozen districts, half a dozen ridings, as we call them in Canada. That's significant. They tend to be swing ridings that could go either way, and upon which elections turn, particularly, as I say, in Ontario, in the provinces of Ontario and British Columbia, in the Canadian context. And I think they imagine that it would be some sort of disaster, and that this is how ignorant they are. Many politicians think that the Sikhs, meaning the entire Sikh community, will rally and vote against them if they criticize Khalistanis. And they haven't stopped to think, well, wait a minute, who do the Khalistanis represent? They're not the Sikhs. I mean, I sometimes say that, I'm sometimes called a bigot or a racist, anti-Sikh, if I criticize Khalistani violence and terrorism. And as you've heard, I defend Khalistani non-violent political action. I believe that referendums should be allowed to proceed freely. But if you're going to say that Khalistanis can operate freely. I should also be able to operate politically freely, and I should be allowed to say that I deplore terrorist violence. So then they call you anti-Sikh, an anti-Sikh bigot. And this is like if I said that I disapprove of drunk driving, and you replied, "Oh, so you're anti-driver?" No, no, just the drunks. That's the game they play. They say, if you're against violence, they say you're against Sikhs, as though all Sikhs are violent. They're the ones smearing the Sikhs, in other words. So this is an extremely complicated issue. That they've got a lead. They're out in front. They are committed. The Khalistanis, I mean, they are committed. They have a plan. They have a social media plan. They have the energy. They seem to have the money. They're way ahead of the rest of us in fighting the online battle and winning it to the point where now they've got politicians running scared. They've got politicians afraid of saying anything against them because their own party brass will come after them. There's an actual case that I've written about in Ontario, for example, where a member of parliament, a Sikh, born and raised in Punjab, but not an Amritpal Sikh, didn't wear a beard or a turban, who was elected to parliament and got the boot from the Liberal Party brass. He was booted out of the Liberal Party caucus because he criticized Khalistani sympathies on the part of other members of the same caucus. He was kicked out by his own party. So that's where we are.
Yeah, Terry, just one follow-up to that question. Looks like these Khalistanis have considerable impact on Canadian politics. What are your thoughts of this kind of influence, that causes the relationship between Canadian government and Indian government to go south? How do ordinary Canadians feel about this? Because India is the fifth largest economy and soon to become the third largest economy. And we all know how Justin Trudeau got a snub because of him hobnobbing with these Khalistanis. But how do ordinary Canadians feel about this thing?
Well, you're right to bring that up. I think that most ordinary Canadians were thoroughly embarrassed by the 2018 trip by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to India. And for those who don't know, very briefly, it wasn't just that he went to every event dressed as though for an Indian wedding, which is rather odd, but also, most significantly, that uh, at one of the glittering diplomatic receptions marking his visit to India in 2018, a convicted Khalistani terrorist who had actually been convicted of shooting a Punjabi cabinet minister on Vancouver Island in 1986 and was a suspect in other incidents as well, that he was invited to dine with the prime minister and to pose for selfies with the prime minister's wife at not one but two elegant receptions and dinner parties. One at the Canadian High Commissioner's residence in New Delhi, and when found out, the whole thing blew up, and the convicted terrorist, Jasper Atwal, was hastily disinvited from dinner, a rather unedifying spectacle, and it was a thorough embarrassment for the Canadian delegation, which the Prime Minister has not really lived down to this day. And as you rightly point out, it's it's kind of a funny story in a way. It was an example of political stupidity. Nobody realized that this might not look good. To have a convicted terrorist invited to dine with the prime minister, and that was not going to look good. But the Canadians gave him the invitation. It was the Canadian High Commissioner's invitation. It was his event, and the embarrassment that resulted just froze the already cool relations that both sides were trying to warm up. Canada needs India perhaps more than India needs Canada, in the sense that India is, as you say, going to be enormously important and already is politically and economically, and it will soon become the most populous country on the planet if it isn't already. We're not quite sure. But these cool relations, it takes two to tango. I've been very critical of the Canadian government for its lamentable role, which we've just illustrated with that one incident, and there are others. But we also have to be fair and recognize that the Indian government has not done itself too many favors on the democracy front. This Twitter space isn't supposed to be about the decline of democracy under Narendra Modi in India, but you ask about relations with Canada, and they might be better if Canada smartened up considerably on the Khalistan file and some others. But they might also warm up if India were to address more candidly the problems that it currently has with the manipulation of the judiciary and of the media and the CAA and other problems in India. I'm not going to go on about it, but remember that if we are to hold up India as a shining light, and that it's Canada's duty to sympathize and to play nice with India, India has some obligations as the world's largest democracy to remain democratic.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Again, like you said, this is not about this space is not about India's democracy decline. But I would suggest you to read Salvatore Bavones's analysis of these democracy indices. These are actually subjective indices, not objective. I would leave it at that, but I will let you make your own conclusion after reading how these indices are compiled. But yeah, switching gears a bit, my next question is related to Air India bombing of Flight 182. All of these Khalistanis literally venerate the bombers. They have their photographs in Gurudwaras and whatnot. But when you ask them, they say that no, this is done by Indian agencies. The Khalistan movement has nothing to do with this. So how do we conclusively debunk them? In your book, you have provided a lot of evidence to the effect, which shows the amount of evidence that is available and the botched up trials and all those things. Could you please elaborate on that one for this audience, please?
Well, I can give you a one-word answer. The answer is ridicule. Ridicule is a very powerful weapon in rhetoric and in any kind of information campaign. And ridicule is what the Khalistanis richly deserve. You're absolutely right that this is a pernicious problem. That they continue to pretend, for example, that, oh no, the Indian government blew up its own plane. What I usually do is I say, okay, will you now explain to me why, if it was blowing up its own plane, why did the Indian government try so desperately to stop the bombing? And they look at you and they say, huh? They don't know what you're talking about because they never read anything and they don't actually know anything about it. They don't make any effort to read anything. They don't read the report of the judicial inquiry, which went on for 4 years. They don't read about the 4 years of the criminal trial in Air India, all of which I sat through. 8 years of it, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of pages of documents. And the answer to the question that I raised, well, about the Indian government blowing up its own plane, is that the Indian government did, in fact, and the evidence is all documented, and I have copies, and everybody has copies. It's all public. The Indian government wrote to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Toronto in the days before the bombing, about 3 weeks before the bombing, saying, look, we've got a wave of threats coming. Air India is constantly under attack. We've got to make sure that we have very careful baggage security. Somebody's going to try to smuggle a bomb on board in a suitcase in the check baggage or the carry-on baggage. We've got to have a crackdown on baggage security. And you know what happened? The Canadian police said, oh, it's the Indians again trying to get extra security for free. They go on and on about this. We're tired of it. They didn't bother. They didn't do anything about it. And the bag with the bomb got on the plane, and nobody checked it. Now, So you have to answer the question, and this is where I come back to my one-word answer: ridicule. Just go out and ridicule Khalistanis who say the Indians blew up their own plane. Why then did they try desperately to ensure that nobody bombed the plane? Why were they trying to stop their own bomb? That's number one. But that's not the end of it. The second answer is, what about the why question? Why would the Indian government blow up its own plane? And the answer, they say, they're ready for that one. The Khalistanis say, well, to make us look bad. It's like the truthers and 9/11. It was done by the Mossad. It was done by the CIA. It was done to make the Muslims look bad. In this case, they say it was done to make the Sikhs look bad. Really? So then you ask this question, and this is where you get to more ridicule. You ask the question, well, if that's the case, why would the Khalistanis look bad only if they killed 300 Canadians, but not if they killed thousands of Indians? People that Indians knew, their friends, their neighbors, their families, thousands of them, mostly Sikhs, by the way, 20,000 people dead in the Sikh insurgency in the 80s and the early 90s. Why did that not suffice to make them look bad? But they'd only look bad if the Indian government blew up 300 Canadians on the other side of the world, people we didn't even know in India. And they have no answer. And the telltale is they never, ever even try to answer these difficult questions. Why would the Indian government want to blow up the plane? And why did they try to stop the bombing?
Yeah, Terry, just a follow up to that. Most of the people who died in the bombing were Canadian citizens.
Yes.
And we see the main perpetrators photographs prominently displayed in Gurudwaras and other places. But imagine you can compare that to basically 9/11 in the US. This is the biggest terrorist attack that has happened in Canada.
Yes.
Imagine the outrage if somebody had a photograph of Bin Laden in their place of worship in US. Imagine the outrage. But yet we don't see that kind of outrage, not even the interest in this case among Canadian citizens. I mean, what could be the reason for this?
Well, I think that they, to some degree, in Canada, there's a natural, and I won't say forgivable, but it's a natural fatigue. It's a very old story. This all happened 30 years ago, 35, 36, 37 years, and they're tired of it. Plus, the story doesn't exactly reflect well on Canada. Canadians don't want to think about it. We're not happy with the way this worked out. We know that Canada dropped the ball, to put it very mildly, both in terms of its failure to stop the bombing in the first place before it happened, and after it happened, its failure to deliver some proper measure of justice to the victims' families. But most of those, even among the politicians who go to these events and watch the parade and stand on a platform underneath the poster that you describe of Talwinder Parmar, for example. I mean, there are other posters, there are other martyrs who are on display, but he's the poster boy for the referendum campaign, according to Sikhs for Justice. They sit there and they just don't know much about it. I mean, it's a long and complicated story, and there's only a few pathetic nerds like me who followed every detail and are ready to explain and to answer the details. Well, they say, for example, that, well, the poster is up there, but he's innocent. He didn't do it. The Indians did it. Well, we discussed that already. Well, they say, okay, well, he was, others among them, they say, well, he was a persecuted innocent. He confessed under torture. Well, there was no confession. No confession has ever been produced. Oh, yes, there was a phony one that was published in a magazine called Tehelka in India years ago. Yeah. Those people came to the commission, the judicial inquiry in Ottawa. They said they had information about a confession by Parmar, and they refused to testify under oath. Oh, they came all the way from Punjab to Ottawa to try to get the judicial inquiry to accept their story that Parmar confessed under torture. But then they didn't want to testify to it. And so the judge quite rightly dismissed it. He said, well, okay, I mean, it's just gossip. It's just you don't want to stand behind your story. They wouldn't allow themselves to be identified. They wouldn't allow themselves to be seen on a witness stand saying these things. So there are so many details like this which people do not know and are bored with and don't want to hear again. They've seen all the stories they could ever want to see and more about the Air India story. That it tires them out. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Canadians are just,
Is it
it's not their battle anymore, they feel.
is it also ignorance? I feel like a lot of Canadians don't know about it, especially
Yeah,
the
it is ignorance. They think that, because the Sikhs or the Khalistanis, I shouldn't conflate the two, because the Khalistanis say that the Sikhs are oppressed in India and they're the victims of genocide. They say, well, they wouldn't lie about a thing like that. That's terrible.
and that's the problem with disinformation. It's really hard to break down this disinformation when it's so consistent and it's coming from leadership and it's so vocal, and people who disseminate this disinformation is at the highest levels of power, like Jagmeet Singh and Timecodes. So
Yes,
it's
yeah, and he's a classic case. I mean, you're referring, I think, or you may have in the back of your mind an interview that I did with Jagmeet Singh
exactly.
in 2018, where I asked him if he would denounce the display of martyr posters honoring Talwinder Parmar, the Air India bomber. And he ducked the question, and I asked him 5 times, and he would not answer it. He would not say a bad word about displaying the martyr posters of Canada's worst ever mass murderer. But he said, "Oh well," and this is typical. Well, I don't think we don't know who did it. Of course, we do. We know exactly who did it. We know where they got the dynamite. We know how the bombs were built. We know where the bombs were built, by who paid for the green tape to wrap up the dynamite stick. We know every detail of it. But Jagmeet Singh said, we don't know who did it. And I think we should have another inquiry to find out who did it, which is utter nonsense from beginning to end. We know exactly who did it.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. Switching gears a little bit. Most people think that this Khalistani problem, terrorism, started in 1980s after the action on Golden Temple. But in your book, you trace it back to early 70s. By the way, those people who haven't read his book, Blood for Blood, 50 Years of Global Khalistani Project, please go and read it. It's very informative. I finished that book in one sitting. Have pinned the link. Please go buy the book and read it. So, Terry, if you can talk about the origin of Khalistani movement, which you trace back to, I think, 1970s, so that
Yes, and
we get an idea.
I'm glad you raised that because it's an important point that a lot of people say, well, it was a reaction to the Indian government's brutality in invading the Golden Temple in June of 1984. That's where this thing went sour. That's when the Sikhs rose and so forth. It was a reaction to Operation Blue Star, as Indians know it, in July of 1984, when Bhindranwale, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, the so-called patron saint, they call him a sant, of the Khalistan movement, met his end in the company of a couple of hundred of his heavily armed gunmen who had turned the Golden Temple into an armed camp. The problem with that theory, that it was all a reaction to the brutality of the Indian government, is that the Indian government was reacting to the brutality of Bhindranwale. The truth is that the killing started much sooner, much earlier. Last year, for example, I think it was last year, it might have been the year before, I got an online death threat from a kid in the UK, a British kid, um, who tweeted. He's a founder member of the National Sikh Youth Federation. And he tweeted that, well, in English we say Terry Milewski, but in Punjabi we say Lala Narayan. That was in Gurmukhi script. So unless you knew what he was raving about, you had no idea what this tweet meant. But if you did know what he meant, and you knew or discovered who Lala Narayan was, you would learn that he was a prominent journalist, editor, politician, quite a well-known man in Punjab, who was murdered after criticizing Bhindranwale in 1981. So it wasn't a reaction to Blue Star, was it? Because that was 1984. And so on. There were many deaths, bodies piled up outside the walls of the Golden Temple after Bhindranwale moved in. He seemed to think that he could send a death squad after any enemy that he wished to eliminate. He was very entitled. There was the death of a very senior police officer, Atwal, all before Operation Blue Star. And that is the point, that what Bhindranwale did, and as Amritpal Singh has done more recently, is defied the state. He defied the legally constituted authorities of the state. He defied the police, and in that case murdered a policeman, a senior policeman, among others. And he kept doing that as a challenge to the state until the state felt that it had to crack down. I won't say that Blue Star was well handled in any way at all. Nobody will tell you that nowadays. You look at what was done, and you will see that it was clumsy. Just isn't a big enough word for the blunder, the disaster that raid upon the Golden Temple was, and the unnecessary death that resulted. But there were a whole bunch of deaths before that caused by Bhindranwale. And that, I think, is a very significant point for people to understand. It's like in all of it's not the first conflict in which you never find the beginning. You look at the Middle East and you say, well, it's because of your massacre. No, yeah, but that massacre was in response to your massacre. Well, the one before that, and you never get to the end of it. But in this case, you can clearly see that it is misinformation to say that the Khalistan movement arose in reaction to an unprovoked attack upon innocent religious people at the Golden Temple in 1984. That simply isn't true.
And Terry, I wanted to, you talked about the death threat. This is very common among the Khalistani crowd. They say they don't have freedom of speech in India and other places, and they're oppressed and stuff, but they don't allow any kind of differing opinion by anybody or any criticism of their movement. In fact, I don't know if you know of this case. The last few weeks, there is a Sikh family in the UK who have have gone into hiding because they made some social media posts about opposing the Khalistan ideology, and they didn't say anything nasty. They were, using humor to oppose Khalistani ideology, and they have received so many threats on their life that they are under police protection now in hiding. So this seems to be a common tactic they use, not just in India but also in the West, and even in Canada. Looks like.
Yes, it's free speech for me, but not for thee, isn't it? This is a little noticed characteristic, and it is a characteristic of the Khalistan movement that they cannot tolerate criticism, and that their reaction, as in the case of this tweet threatening me a year or two ago, their reaction is immediately that's their first thought. And for the guy who wrote that tweet, he thinks of the name Terry Milewski and he thinks about murder. That's the next thought he has. And I constantly get mail which hurls insults, and they never answer your point. They never produce evidence. They never answer the question. Yeah, well, why would the Indian government want to blow up their own plane? They never answer the question. They never produce evidence. They don't live in the world of reality, and it's not known enough that the famous cases like the Air India bombing, for example, that we spent some time on today, those aren't the only ones. What about the murder of Tara Singh, who I briefly mentioned as the father of a friend of mine, and who was going to be a witness at the Air India trial, heard a confession by one of the alleged bombers, and was murdered before he could testify. What about the beating of Ujjwal Assange, who rose to be the Premier of British Columbia, Chief Minister in Indian terms, and who was beaten almost to death in his parking garage because he stood for peace and dialogue, and he didn't think that the Khalistani terrorism was going to get them anywhere. It was going to blacken the name of the cause, which of course it did. He was right. What about the beating of Balraj Dayal in Toronto? He was a young Sikh. I think he was 28 or so at the time, and he came out in favor of the Longowal Agreement. This was again long ago. This is 1985, before the Air India bombing, and he suggested that we should give peace a chance. And he was friendly with some Hindus. They formed a group together to say, give peace a chance. And he was beaten almost to death in his parking lot. I was lucky to live to tell about it. So it's an unreported, and I think it shouldn't be hidden, but more people should know that this is routinely the modus operandi of the hardline Khalistanis, that they just go straight, they don't use argument. They're not into talking. They're not into evidence, facts, or reality. They just like violence. That's their method of operation.
So, Terry, do you see a resurgence of violence coming back to Canada, specifically against the Hindu community, as we've seen some signs with these, vandalization of the temples and whatnot? So, if you're a Hindu living in Canada currently, should you be concerned? Should you be, looking at the back of your eyes whenever you're walking down the street with, with all this that's going on currently?
I think it's too early to panic about that. I don't. I'm not in favor of fanning the flames of panic and fear. I do not know of. There has been incidents of violence. You will have seen a video of a burly guy identified with the Khalistanis pushing another guy down on the ground at a truck rally in Toronto. It wasn't. It could have been badly hurt, but as it turned out, he wasn't. There have been minor incidents, but I don't think we should fan the flames and exaggerate this. At the moment, what we have to worry about is a successful social media campaign that has revived the Khalistan movement, and we should worry that the next step after that, as it was in the past, is violence. The next step after you teach kids that the Hindus are massacring Sikhs in India routinely, that it's an ongoing genocide, the next step in that is violence in the imagined defense of your people. So I'm not saying we shouldn't worry about it. I'm saying let's not pretend that we have already reached that point. We haven't. Not quite. Not yet. Let's hope we don't.
Yeah, Terry, you yourself have received many death threats for writing against Khalistanis, basically for telling the truth. Not only that, they went after you financially. They filed a lot of lawsuits against you. Could you please, talk about those things, the lawsuits, and how they filed and then didn't show up to the court?
Well, it's been sort of a minor irritation. That's all. They've gone after me personally, financially. I mean, because that's not really worth it, really, because I don't have any money. But they did once sue me for $136 million, which made me feel very important. But they were actually suing my employer, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and some others who were all swept into this one thing. But it was a typical case, except for the large number attached to it. It was a typical case, and they never followed through. The idea of these lawsuits, which there have been quite a few, the idea is to call a press conference and say, we're suing that bastard Terry Milewski. We got him. And it's going to be a really powerful suit for lots and lots of money. And we're going to get a few headlines. And then nothing happens. They never follow through. There's no there. And so to date, nothing's happened. It's that simple.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. With that, let's get some others also into the conversation. Welcome, Puneet. Thank you for being on the stage. I see Panditji in the listeners. Panditji, I sent you an invite. Please come up. Please do participate in this discussion. I also see Pun Facts. For those who don't know, Pun Fact is a very good handle. It feeds a lot of information about Khalistan. Please do follow him. And yeah, Puneet. Puneet,
Yeah, it looks like Neat
he
might have
left.
stepped away. Maybe we could go to Pun Fact then. In that case,
Yes.
welcome aboard, Pun Fact.
Thank you, host.
Pun
Hi,
Fact.
Terry.
Yeah.
Hi.
So Terry, as you pretty much explained the situation here in Canada, right? How the politicians support Khalistanis, Jagmeet Singh, all those people, right? And especially Canadian truckers. Apart from that, do you see any the role of any other country to basically help these Khalistanis? Like, are there any other powers or countries? Apart from Pakistan, who are heavily involved in this Khalistan conspiracy.
Not really, no. I think Pakistan as I said earlier, the essential additive to the Khalistan cause, and it remains so, although its own future is in doubt whether it's just going to sort of be a Chinese branch plant or wholly owned subsidiary, which is concerning in its own way. But I don't see other countries, I mean, other than, some degree of Canadian style political sympathies, misguided sympathies, misinformation, localized, not on the country level, in, for example, the UK, and in small pockets in the US, maybe Germany. I don't see any other, no other country other than Pakistan is interested in this, really, not at all.
Right.
One question, Terry. Sorry, fun fact, go
No
ahead.
worries, no worries, B. Yeah, I was just going to ask another question, B. Sorry. My question would be like, how do Canadians see people like Jagmeet Singh who are like open, they support Khalistan openly, right? I mean, how do Canadians feel? I know the sentiment of Sikh community. I think many people, of course, still support them, knowing the fact that he supports Khalistan. People still do vote for them, including liberals, right, in Canada, who are Khalistani sympathizers. And you rightly said even liberals kicked one MP out from their caucus, right? But how do the natives, or let's say Canadians, feel about that? Like, are they sort of do they anticipate that how problematic it could be if someone like Jagmeet Singh reaches to the top position of the country, let's say, or even if he sits in the cabinet, even if he's in the power? Do Canadians see that as a threat or not?
I think in the main they do not. They are complacent. They don't take all of this particularly seriously. They've got other issues to worry about. At the moment, they're worried about the extent of Chinese influence in Canadian elections. They are not, frankly, very exercised about this. And indeed, to some extent, it's been worse than that. That when Jagmeet first won the leadership of the New Democratic Party, the leftist party, which sort of holds the balance of power in the House of Commons now and has pledged to support the Liberals for the time being, thus keeping the government in power. So he's an important, pivotal figure in Canadian politics. When he was confronted with these questions about, would he denounce the Martyr posters honoring Talwinder Parmar, a lot of the people on the left called me a racist. Why? Well, because you would never ask that question except that he was a Sikh. Well, I've asked the same question of numerous politicians of all colors and sizes from all parties for the preceding 10 years. I've been asking that same question. We asked Trudeau the same question. We asked the Liberal premiers of British Columbia and Ontario. But never mind. Those are facts. Facts often don't have much to do with what happens. There was a considerable pushback aimed at me, calling me a racist and saying that it was improper to harass poor Mr. Singh with these questions about the Martyr posters of the Air India bomber. But in the main, I would have to be, it's important to be realistic. In the main, I think Canadians didn't pay much attention. A lot of them thought less, yes, possibly, of Jagmeet Singh, but a lot thought that he was hard done by, that he was the victim of a media gotcha. And I wouldn't like to calculate exactly what the numbers were on each side.
It, Terry, at some point, do you foresee Khalistanis becoming more of a Canadian problem than a problem for India? If India is willing to sort of shore up its security measures against the Khalistanis, now you have this population with sort of like this violent mindset that you alluded to earlier, without much of an outlet, and which could then, lead to increase in crime, increase in drug activity that we see in Canada going up. How do you see the Canadian society being able to absorb, this sort of a cult, like a violent, a cult that's out there? How does Canada deal with this?
Well, I think that Canada is already dealing with it in this way, that the fact of the matter is that the majority of the Indian diaspora, the vast majority, I mean, I'm talking an overwhelming majority of Indians living in Canada, have an extremely good, and they deserve it, extremely good reputation. That is to say, they work hard, pay their taxes, get their kids to school on time, just like everybody else, and they have done very well at higher education, in the bureaucracy, in the professions, and so on. They've got an excellent reputation. It's just that it's important to remember that we must not smear the entire Indian community or the entire Sikh community with the sins of this very small minority, the Khalistanis, just because they make all the noise. And that's to some extent what's been happening. In my opinion, it'd be great if more Indians pushed back. But they're busy getting the kids to school on time like everybody else. Not everyone is interested in politics. So, I mean, there is, of course. I'm not trying to avoid your question. I'm just saying that let's remember we're talking about a tiny minority. That's very important to bear in mind. But there is, of course, a problem, not just with this minority, but with others, some other ethnic communities, where you'll find statistics saying that, well, there's more crime. Well, hello, welcome to reality. It's not unusual in any country for newcomers who have difficulty getting established to have a higher incidence of crime, and that tends to fade away when you get to the second and third generation and they get settled in and they get put down roots and own houses, and then they start loving property and thinking about getting their kids to school on time, and they're not engaged in crime. I think that aspect of the problem is exaggerated. The problem we have with the Khalistani element in Canada, there is a certain overlap with the criminal element. You saw, for example, that one of the Air India suspects who was acquitted at the trial in Vancouver in 2005, Ripudaman Singh Malik, the financier of the Baba Khalsa, he paid for the terrorist group which blew up Air India. Malik was assassinated last year in the middle of July in a contract hit, a gangland contract hit.
Did that hit have anything to do with the Khalistan project, you think?
We don't know. The two kids who were the shooter and the driver, I guess, they were caught, but we don't know who paid them. As I say, this is an organized crime affair, and Malik was not unknown in the world of organized crime, let's say, to put it very politely. He was engaged in immigration fraud, welfare fraud. He was not the friendliest neighbor you ever wanted to meet. And his enemies, who were many, apparently knew who to call if they wanted to eliminate him. You or I, if we wanted to eliminate somebody, we wouldn't know who to call. Well, these people did. He was hanging out with a bad crowd. I'm being polite. And there has been an overlap between, let's say, some of the people surrounding Malik, some of his henchmen. One of them, for example, his son testified at the Air India trial that he was a drug dealer and an organized criminal that had made a nice packet of money in credit card fraud and drug running across the U.S. border, and cocaine and marijuana. He was quite blithe about this. He said, "Yeah, that's how I make my living." And Mr. Malik, nice Mr. Malik, was like a father figure to me. Oh, that's nice. So he's a father figure for gangsters, for confessed, admitted gangsters. So I'm not trying to underplay the fact that there is an overlap. If you want to draw a Venn diagram of Khalistani militants and organized criminals, you might find a certain overlap. Yes, I'm just saying that let's keep that, like everything else, let's keep our perspective and remember that we're talking about a tiny minority of the community, and that in general, the entire Indian diaspora and the Sikhs most especially have an extremely good reputation, which they have earned the hard way.
Looks like we got a few speakers on stage with their hands up. Alama, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Keep it concise. Yes, and keep it concise, please.
Yeah. About this Khalistan issue and generally a certain amount of disaffection amongst the non-Khalistani Sikh population as well. Often focus on the events of the 80s and who did what. But when I think about it, I feel like there's a more fundamental issue that goes back to since the partition. Sikhi and the sentiment in there is fundamentally irredentist. In other words, see partition as being very fair to what happened. Sikhs and also Hindus lost a lot of land where they were, a majority, even if not a sizable minority, including many very holy places. And they felt, and they feel that neither does India have any intent to get those areas back, nor will India allow them to try it. In fact, after partition, that's exactly what was attempted by Sikhs to go back and get some of the territory back, but it was who went and forcibly dismantled the plants, the Jathas. So I think there's that as the generations go by, their own future generations will become as sort of in their view weak as India is in terms of its intent to get back. So I was just wondering what your impression is, and anybody else here, that this fundamental irredentist Sikh, how much of a psychological impact do you think that plays in this issue always remaining on a simmer?
I'm afraid that I must be candid and say that I'm not sure I completely understand the question, and I'm almost certain that I'm not qualified to answer it. I'm not. Partition, I've never been able to get to grips with properly, because as soon as you read something about partition, you read something else. It just never ends. And I've no doubt that if you're finding the origins of some of this in partition, I would certainly agree with you. But on the details of how that influenced what is happening today, what happened in the 80s, I don't feel well qualified to trace those influences.
Just for housekeeping, if people who are on the panel can raise their hands, we'll come to you, and then you can ask Terry a question. Please keep it brief so that we can have more questions for Terry and give him more opportunities to answer. So I think next in line is Sanathan. Go ahead, Sanathan.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Terry. So my question is for you.
Hi.
And I mean, keeping the idea of Khalistan alive and keeping the resistance alive is good for like a lot of political outfits across the world. So I'm just trying to understand what's in for the political entities, right? Like, for example, if you look at Simranjeet Singh Mann from Shiromani Akali Dal Amritsar, there's an old video of him where he is issuing letters.
I'm sorry, Sanatan. I'm sorry.
It's
So,
not
so
old. It's not
just
old.
just a second. I'm sorry to interrupt. San, can we? There is another Terry Glavin, and if we can have up on the stage, you'll be. He was actually the first Canadian journalist to get on the story of Bhindanwale, and he was Terry probably followed it for the longest, but Terry Glavin was actually the first journalist to get like on the story. So he's a great.
Yeah.
He's like a like a great what do you say, war correspondent. So please have him up. I'm sorry to
Where is
interrupt.
he? I don't see him. Can you ask Terry to
Yes,
raise
I
his
see
hand?
him. I see
Oh,
him.
okay.
I've sent him an invite to join the stage. Terry Glavin, please go ahead and accept the invite. I see him.
Do we have enough room for him on the speaker panel? If
Yeah,
I
not, we
think.
can move some
he's
people
fine.
down.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay,
Hi, Terry. Welcome.
so
yeah. Welcome, Terry. Let me also welcome Puneet. I don't think anybody needs introduction to Puneet. He has done a wonderful job. Please follow him if you haven't already. Yeah, Puneet, welcome. Go ahead, sir.
both the Terrys are here actually, and the journey starts here, and it's an honor to speak with them. And as somebody who speaks with his own name, I know what is the cost to do that. Because you're dealing with like a deranged cult, and who is like revels in violence and victimhood at the same time. And Terry has written this marvelous book, but I'll go to the other Terry, like Terry Glavin, because Terry actually like grew up in these neighborhoods with a lot of Sikh and Punjabi population, used to go to the Gurudwaras. And Terry can correct me if I'm going wrong, but like Terry was actually, even before 84 Blue Star, he was like making a noise, like this thing that is being in Canada in the Gurudwaras, and this hatred and genocidal hatred, and this is being exported, and this is eventually going to explode and cause a lot of damage. And like Canada got involved after the Air India bombing, but I think Terry is one of the rare journalists who actually met Bhindanwala in person as well. So Terry, like I know it was heartbreaking for you, this Air India bombing, and you didn't really follow it, but still, like whatever you want to share about this Khalistan madness, whatever you feel like sharing today, we all will learn from it. Please, welcome.
Well, hi. I wasn't expecting to speak on this subject. I am down with a horrible case of acute bronchitis, so my voice might sound a little odd. But what can I contribute exactly to this? The question is, why does this Khalistan phenomenon persist? Is it the degree to which the Pakistani ISI, perhaps it's mainly a function or partly a function of the ISI. I can tell old war stories, I suppose, but so can Terry Milewski.
So
So
Terry,
So I
like
I
don't.
let me change the question. So like the Khalistani narrative is basically started in 84. They attacked our temple, and then that has happened, and what it was justified in reaction, and now we want to state. But actually, you go a bit before Blue Star. So what you saw of Khalistan before Blue Star, if you can share.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I can talk about that. I was. How do I enter the picture? Well, I mean, I kind of, I was a labor reporter for the most part. So, I spent a lot of time talking with the IWA and the sawmills and farm workers union. The farm workers were organizing at the time. A lot of the farm workers were from Punjab. And I lived in a neighborhood that was, I don't know, was it maybe a third Sikh? Just out my back window is the old Sikh Temple Sukhsagar, which was built in 1911, I guess. And so, the Sikhs, that's my boys. That's my people. That's I'm Irish Catholic, and then you got all these Italians, and you got the Chinese green grocers and the farmers, and Japanese, a lot of fishermen in the community. And that's the way it was. So I first interviewed Talwinder Singh Parmar 5 years before the Air India atrocity. And of course, he was the guy who did it, you might say. And so for me, I mean, I felt it was very personal. I felt it was as though, for most journalists, I think that's when the story began. But for me, it was where it ended. I mean, it didn't really, because of course I covered it quite a bit after that. But I did kind of tend to. I turned all my files over to Kim Bolan. It was a heartbreak. It was just too painful to think about, because and the irony was, I was actually with family in Cork with my Uncle Phil the day before the plane went down, off Sheep's Head Peninsula in County Cork. And I knew the people who did it. I'd actually been on that very plane, of course, about 6 months before, I guess. And it was just terrible, because it was as though I had failed. I had failed. And that we had all failed, and there were people in the community, in the Sikh community, in the temples, in the workplace, in the trade union movement, who were trying to alert the public that this phenomenon, this Khalistani thing, was not some kind of progressive third world liberation movement. That the position on the left at the time was that it was essentially theocratic fascism, and that these people were doing a tremendous amount of harm to communal relations back in India, that they were thugs. But it was very, very peculiar, because the Khalistanis did tend to sort of, and my brother Terry might correct me, but it seems to me that the Khalistanis were really gaining control of the temples, of the Gurudwaras, and then after Operation Blue Star, which was terribly, terribly conducted, it was a mess. The narrative changed, right? At least in the sort of broader community, the non-native, pardon me, the non-Indian media, the narrative became solidified as, this terrible oppressive government of this Congress party government, and that they were the villain, and that they had done this terrible thing to the Sikh community, and that the Sikhs were, rising up. So, yeah, that's what I remember. I don't know if this is being useful to anyone, but there we have it.
Terry, I have a small follow up to you. This is very insightful that you grew up with them and you kind of forewarned that something like this would happen. How do you relate it to what's happening now? And this is a question we were asking Terry Milewski as well. Maybe you've been following what's happening now with this Amritpal
Right.
person in Punjab, but there's no takers in Punjab for Khalistan movement anymore.
Right.
So most of it is a social media campaign by Canadian, US, and UK and Australian Khalistanis. So what do you make of it? How does it look to you now as opposed to when it was?
Well, I think the main thing, and it's been this way for some time now, and I think my brother Terry's encounter with Jagmeet Singh is an illustration of this. Is that this whole phenomenon shifted? It was comprehended and understood as a kind of communalistic, theocratic, fascist scourge on the people of Punjab, primarily Sikh and Hindu. That it was, peopled by religious fanatics, and a lot of it had to do with the power politics of Punjab and Haryana and the disputes over the rivers and what have you. But what seems to me that now it's shifted completely. It's become kind of emblematic of progressive left-wing sympathies in the Sikh community. I mean, you know, Jagmeet Singh, and he's the leader of the New Democratic Party, for God's sake. This would have been completely unthinkable in earlier years. But something's, you know, a lot of it is, I think, related to changes on the left generally, in the Anglosphere particularly, the emergence of identity politics as something that is understood to be, you know, progressive and cutting edge and all that sort of thing. This is actually very new. You know, this is something that's very new, and it's given room, and it's allowed for the emergence of Sikh militancy, Khalistani politics, to be understood as kind of progressive or edgy or avant-garde, radical chic. And this is completely sort of inimical to, you know, the more sturdier and older and deeper traditions of the left. But there we go. So
That's
that, I
very,
guess, my understanding.
yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it's very hard to compute fascist, theocratic, violent movement or ideology, you know, finding its home in chic liberal politics right now. But that's what we have. Thank you, Terry. It's lovely to have you here on the stage as well. In the interest of keeping, you know, this open and having as many questions as possible, we wanted to go to the people who have raised their hands. San, do you want to take over? And I don't know who's next.
Yeah,
I think, yeah,
just
go ahead.
a quick time check. Terry M and Terry G can both answer questions. Terry, I don't know how much time do you have. We just want to make sure that everybody who has raised their hands get a chance to
Yeah,
ask you a question.
let's deal with the questions that are out there now, but let's not be here until 10 o'clock tonight.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, guys, please go ahead and ask questions, but make sure it's
Yeah,
a question,
I'll,
not a statement.
oh, if
Hold on
I,
one second. 1 second. Let's just figure out what the cue was. Do you guys know who was first to? I think it was Sudhagari. So yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Sudhagari. You can ask
let's
your
go to
question.
Sardarji. Yeah, please make sure
hey,
it's a question. If it's a statement, make sure it's a brief
yeah, it's not
statement.
a statement, man.
Yeah, who was next, Sardarji or
Sudhagar was asking a
Sudagar?
question, so let him go. Let's go with Sudhagar.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
okay.
Sudhagar.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks for your time. This is just for both the Terrys. It's a pretty open-ended question, but just to get clarity on the fact of a new brand of Sikh sovereignty discussions that have come up, which is a non-violent means of pursuing Khalistan. What are your guys' position on that in terms of the evolution? I'm not sure how you guys have been following up, but there's been an evolution in the discourse of Sikh sovereignty, and there's a new idea of pursuing Sikh sovereignty through non-violent means and no militancy. What's your position on that, knowing that you guys have seen Sikhs in Canada for about 100 plus years now? Thank you.
Well, if I can have a crack at that, and I alluded to this to a degree previously, that yes, you're absolutely right. The focus, at least in the propaganda, now, according to Sikhs for Justice and its leader Gurudwaras Singh Panoon, is on a democratic approach, which he describes again as ballots, not bullets. Ballots, not bullets. That's what we're all about. We are pursuing a democratic approach. And unfortunately, that isn't true. And I say that because the same Gurudwaras Singh Panoon simultaneously announces that the campaign headquarters for the referendum campaign in Canada will be named the by Shahid Talwinder Singh Parmar Voting
Oh my
Center.
God.
And he says that further that when the vote is in Mississauga, that it will be named the By Shahid Harjinder Para Voting Center.
But
Para
that's
is
only
not a
one person. That's only one person, though.
no. Hold on. This is the official position of the campaign, the global campaign by Sikhs for Justice to have a referendum on Sikh sovereignty. This is nobody is objecting to this. Nobody is saying, "Hey, you're only one person. You don't speak for us all." No, everyone is using these posters showing Parmar and Para and the assassins of Indira Gandhi and on and on and on and on. It is a consistent theme of the group that is organizing the supposedly democratic referendum. They are completely contradicting themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot. That is the problem.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Sukhvinder, do you know who was next?
Yes, I believe it was PB08. PB08, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me time. I have like two, three questions. Like, first is that like, what do you think about like, is there is a threat? The Khalistani is threat for a new global threat, and the other thing is that like, as the Terry know about that, like, the killings in the Punjab. So he also know that like, how many Hindus it's. Killing in Punjab, like how he is aware of that, like how the Khalistani Sikhs, like they kill the like specifically like Brahmins or like Hindus and hanging on the tree and like shoot their dead bodies. He knows about that. And the last question is that like the people who told like it's not violence and that start with the violence and still the violence is going on, like you guys know, like last year it's happening like in the Punjab, in the Amritsar, the broad light, Amritpal supporter, he just killing a Hindu leader in the Punjab. So can you just tell me about it? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to detail the events of Punjab. I haven't been to Punjab recently for a few years, and I'm not an authority what's happening on the ground in Punjab, except I've seen what everyone's seen, but no more than that. But I will say that this is why I do react firmly to people who say, "Well, we're all about democracy now." Well, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. Right now, I don't believe it.
Yeah, the very
Yeah, did
fact
you
that they have
yeah, so
yeah, they have the
so
posters
just
they have at the Gurudwaras and the in the indoctrination of Western, Khalistani children that's coming out of Gurudwaras in Sacramento and New Jersey, where they are calling, in Punjabi, they're calling for the genocide of Hindus. I mean, when you have that happening and then you turn around and say, it's a peaceful movement now, um, it's very hard to believe you. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. But PBO8, you were going to say you had a follow up. Please go ahead.
yeah, just one thing, like Terry, do you know where that like how they kill Hindus in Punjab? Because I'm asking that question because I'm the one of the team member of the Punjab file, so we have like all that data, so like very well like what's going on like in the 17th and late 90s. So that's why I'm just asking you that question. If you know, just let me know. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure about the question quite, but it sounds a lot like the pattern of the 1970s, early 1980s is being repeated in Punjab today. I mean, it was very, very communal. It was, we have to kill Hindus. Bidranwala I was there, he said this to me. Um, People always doubt that this was true, that we have to fly through the air and slay Hindus and they, you take people like the Dashmesh people and Talwinder Singh Parmar's people, they would boast about the number of assassinations that they'd carried out. And half of the time, the people being assassinated were, innocent uh, Hindu lawyers or, in many cases, Sikh, liberals and playwrights and poets and what have you. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, at a different kind of a level, how much slack we should cut Khalistanis now that some of them appear to be saying we're not physical force militants anymore. We're not, we ballots, not bullets, and all that sort of thing. Well, so what? That doesn't necessarily lend any merit to the case of a Khalistani republic. There it is.
Terry, so you touched upon your interview with Puneet. I'm going to mute you for a second. Yeah, Puneet, I'm going to mute you for a second. So Terry, you touched upon your interview with Bindranwale, and is that out there somewhere? Can people find it? And if not, we have all heard tropes where he goes about and says that he's going to kill 5,000 Hindus if he doesn't get his demands met by the police. He's going to go out. He had this plan of, two people on a motorcycle, one with a gun sitting right behind, shooting up Hindus, right? So, what sort of content did he
Right.
tell
Is it
you in
out
that
there
interview?
anywhere? Yeah. Well, you got to remember that this was, back in the analog time, in the Iron Age, the early 1980s. I've often wondered, there was another journalist with me at the time, Thor Gudmundsson. He was an Icelandic journalist who sort of along for the ride. He might have a recording. I don't have any recordings of this. It was just my notes. I think I had some recordings at the time. But I mean, all of this is it's on the record. It's published by the Globe and Mail. I was covering all of this for the Globe and Mail. I did have separate files, I had a huge file folders that I actually, I turned over to the RCMP quite happily. It's not something that journalists usually do, but this was a mass murder of all of those innocent people in that plane. But yeah, no, I mean, I think, Puneet, did you not find? I used to write for India Abroad as well. I
Yeah.
think I have made available to people over time what I have, remaining from the Globe and Mail, particularly in the early 1980s.
So Terry, actually, India Abroad, it used to be one of the best, diaspora newspapers, and there is no digital version of it. But if you go to libraries, you can get print version. I got it. I didn't have enough manpowers to digitize it, but I'm working on it. Terry, I just want to check. I don't know if you know. I showed it to Terry Milewski. There was actually a real thought about after Bhindanwale to make Parmar as the next leader of the seminary he was running. Did you know that? So
I did
Parmar
not know
was
that. I can't remember
yeah.
that anyway.
Basically, I dug out contemporaneous reporting when they are talking about it. So there was actually an idea after Bhindranwale to make Parmar the seminary head, and he was already very prominent at that time, and then he basically blew up the plane. Yeah, sorry, that's a small point, and they can continue with the questions.
Right.
It's the PSYOP operation that's gone from a terrorist being turned into a sump, right? It's quite fascinating. It's almost blasphemous to even refer to this man without certain suffixes after his name, or in a certain respectful manner. How did that transition happen, and why are some people so blind to it when
No,
the
Subdeep,
history?
I'll answer this. Actually, it's not organic. So if you dig out, 1990s, her name is Patricia Gossman, and she writes a report for the Asia Human Rights, something like that, Human Rights Report. And again, whenever you read human rights, they're Sweden, they just lecture you, this should be done. But in that report, she actually does the umbrella organization of the militants, which was Panthi Committee from Pakistan. They had issued a decree that anybody who doesn't call Bhindanwala a sant will be met with a bullet. And what the threats they gave were very, very credible. So it was, on the barrel of the gun, they made Punjabi say that he was a sant. You can read the human rights in Patricia Gossman. So it was not, people said it out of their free will. They were forced to say this. And of course, now there is a lunar generation sitting in Canada. They believe, the guy just came and he said sovereignty. Do they know, what does sovereignty mean? That you had English common law, then you have social contract. Today we have human rights. What does he mean basically by, but again, I don't know, what kind of people they grow up in, Surrey and Brampton, they know nothing. And the first thing they should, Khalistan movement started by running genocide on Nirankari sect. So would Nirankaris have like their freedom of speech in this Khalistan? Or what kind of referendum it is? Like referendum, like if somebody runs like only Protestants do and Catholics not. So like Hindus are not part of this referendum. It's like height of stupidity. They just use the word sovereignty. And I think it's like, Terry Terry said it rightly, it's the left. But I think it's like, a failure of the education system. And, like where people just use words they don't understand. And the very worst of the worst you see from this Khalistani ghettos in Surrey and Brampton. It's just like, and amazing just to listen to the words that they say. And I don't think they understand, somebody has taught them and they parrot them.
Thank you so much. This is an amazing conversation. I want to get more people to get a chance to ask Terry more questions, either of the Terrys or both of the Terrys. We do have some people who belong to the Khalistan ideology on stage. I think one of you has also been working with the new phenomenon, the new preacher, Amritpal, who is a fugitive right now. So we are looking forward to hearing your questions. But if you have a question, please raise your hand, because that's the order we will go in. Sardarji, if you can please wait. I want to ask this guy, Jay Singh from the UK, to go ahead. Please ask a question, no statements. It's really an opportunity to ask Terry a question, and I want you to get a chance. And then we'll go to Sardarji after that. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, just to clarify, I'm not affiliated with anyone. I'm only asking my question in a personal capacity. So my question is, what is in principle wrong with the idea of sovereignty for, it? I mean, a general definition, like, should people of Punjab, regardless of their religion, be making their own decisions, or should it be the 1.3 billion people of India via their 540 MPs who should decide matters for them? That's sort of the basic question. Regardless of the individuals and posters, we get into this, match. I mean, just comparing it to, let's say, the Irish nation, the Irish Republic, and the IRA. The IRA, yes, it was a terrorist organization, and we can't conflate that with the political concept of an Irish Republic. So why do we conflate the idea of Khalistan as a political idea with terrorism and acts of violence that people might have committed or alleged to have committed, which which we all should condemn unequivocally? Yeah, that's my question. I hope it's clear.
I can take a shot at that.
Yes.
Because my people are Irish, and my family was actually quite divided, you might say, on the subject. My father was Fianna Éireann, very militant Irish Republican, but after De Valera decided that Ireland would be neutral, a lot of the old IRA guys were really angry about that and crossed the Irish Sea, put on a British uniform to fight Mr. Hitler. That's what my father did, and that's why we couldn't move back to Ireland after the war. That's why we ended up in Canada. And my mother, both of them were mom and dad were both in the RAF. These things are complicated, I agree. You can be an Irish Republican and you can yearn for a 32-county republic and not be some pimply-faced fellow in a balaclava who's blowing up Protestant kids on the way to school. But the difficulty is that I would say, particularly after Bloody Sunday in the North, that physical force republicanism was basically the only kind that there was. There was the SDLP and so on. It's all very interesting. But this is a deep question that does come up in the matter of national liberation, and sovereignty movements comes up in India all the time. It's not for me to say what the hell, but there's a couple of things. The first is that the unless things have changed dramatically in India in the last few years, my conception of the sort of enlightened, progressive, liberal view was that you can have all kinds of interesting conversations about how much sovereignty, local states and groupings should assert for themselves, and ethnicities should have to themselves. But it's sort of like opening a dam. Like, how many different linguistic groups? My God, linguistic families there are in India. and national communities there are in India. So, there's, I think, a lot of sensible resistance to the concept of Khalistan in that respect, is there not? And similarly, I really don't know how you can distinguish the notion of Khalistan from the notion of a physical force ethno-nationalist movement. I just don't know how it can be done, and I don't know that it would be done. Some people, and I really don't know how relevant this is to people in Punjab. I mean, it just seems to be primarily a fascination or preoccupation in the diaspora.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Terry M, do you have anything to add to this?
I would only say that I agree with what my brother Terry has said. Or everything every Terry says is always right. But the question began with the notion of what's wrong in principle with sovereignty. And of course, there's nothing wrong in principle with sovereignty. And I don't think anyone's making that case. The problem is that the Khalistan project specifically has associated itself. It's not somebody else that's imposed the association with terrorism upon the Khalistan movement. Nobody did that to the Khalistan movement. Khalistan movement, from its beginnings, was extremely violent. Second of all, you've got a concept in Khalistan which is not entirely undefined. It's too undefined for my taste. I don't know how it's going to be governed, who's going to run it, who's going to decide who's going to run it, and all of that. And when I tried, when I was writing about this, to find a constitution or some sort of description of how it would be governed, this Khalistan, I came upon a very nice constitution which had been carefully drafted and seemed legitimate, in which it was stated that this would be a free market democracy. Excellent. I read on. This is good. And then the next paragraph was non-Sikhs will have no role in politics. Oh, well, okay. I guess that answered my question, didn't it? So, now, of course, you've got this bizarre democracy movement for the referendum to be carried on in the name of Canada's worst ever mass murderer, among many other murderers. So, I'm sorry, but if your movement for independence associates itself with hideous, deadly violence which takes the lives of 20,000 people, mostly Sikhs, by the way. I mean, don't get me started on 1,400 Sikh policemen in Punjab, hundreds of their family members wiped out. They wanted to make sure that the 12-year-old daughter of a police constable in Punjab, that she should also die along with the rest of the family. So they chased her to the house next door and shot her there. They absolutely were determined to wipe out anyone who stood in their way, Sikh, Hindu alike. And if you associate your own movement with that, then you can't really blame others for associating you with that. It's as simple as that. They're not going to shake this. This monkey is going to stay on their back, and they're not going to shake it off as long as they carry these posters of gun-toting martyrs.
Thank you so much.
100%.
Thank you, Terry.
So let's move on to Sardarji, right? Like he's had his hand raised for quite a while. Sardarji, go ahead. And please keep your please
Sardar.
Thank you.
please
Yeah,
a concise question and no long-winded comments, please.
Yeah, just
Right.
one quick
Thank you.
announcement, Sardarji, before you go. A lot of people are requesting to come up. I will bring up as many people as we can, but please be patient. People on stage, if you want to ask a question, raise your hands. I'll come to you in order. Yeah, go ahead, Sardarji.
Thank you.
Ask your question. Yeah.
Thanks, Terry and Terry, for your really insightful thoughts. You've had very deep first-hand experience in this field, especially in Canada. So thank you. It's very very helpful to kind of get more some in-depth insight into it. One thing, so I think when I look at the problem, when I look at Khalistan issue in the present context, the oxygen for it is coming from the West. When I say the West, it's diaspora, right? In Canada and the other places. And that's where we'll need to defeat it. And that's where we'll need to solve for it. But the challenge, and that's where my question is the whole intersectionality that's been built between the Khalistanis, and you touched upon Jagmeet. So Khalistanis left and the Islamists. So love to hear your thoughts on uh, how do we tackle that problem? We can tackle, I think, as a Sikh Sangat, we at least in my city in the US, we have made sure that the Khalistanis do not have any say and they don't get into controlling the Gurudwara Sahib. We'll get that back in the due course of time. But the whole intersectionality that I mentioned, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to address that piece, because that is the oxygen we need to take out of it. And once we do that, the issue in Punjab, whatever they've been funding and the narrative they've been building, in my opinion, should be, we can address that.
If I can take a stab at that, I would say that it may sound obvious, but leadership is important, and that's what we lack. Leadership is important in countering the narrative that has infected too many Gurdwaras and too many young people who aren't getting a decent education, either in Punjab or in Brampton. We clearly have a terrible education system that has not brought people up able to think for themselves and to realize that they should question what they're told about the other guys did all the bad stuff and we did nothing. The other guys did all the massacres, we never massacred anyone. The other guys blew up their own plane. And all of the sort of nonsense that is fed to the next generation of Khalistanis, that has to be countered. Politicians have to stand up and say, I'm not coming to your parade on Vaisakhi Day if you're going to be parading pictures of Talwinder Parmar. I'm going to stand up to that. I'm just going to go to someone else's parade. We need people to lead the way and to educate people better to realize that when they are being told lies. And in order to get there, we have to start. The first step, in my view, hasn't been taken. I mean, Jagmeet Singh, we discussed earlier, and I think I said something to the effect that there were as many people who thought it was terribly unfair to expect him to denounce martyr pictures honoring a mass murderer, as there were people who thought that he dropped the ball and he made a fool of himself. I mean, there were just as many people on the other side of the question, calling me a racist and a bigot and so on. So we haven't taken those first steps to lead the way and to expect political leaders, if you're not going to denounce this, if you're not going to help beat this back, then, sorry, but you lost my vote. But so far, that's not happening.
Yeah, I'm not very hopeful either, I regret to say. There is a very strange kind of political milieu that we've entered, that everybody seems to have amnesia, and you can reconfigure progressive politics to mean almost anything you want. You have, I can't remember, was it the Muslim Association of Canada or something, over the Christmas, Jagmeet Singh was giving a talk to this group, and it's essentially the Canadian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's just sort of, it's normalized, I guess, is the problem, and it is, and I think Terry would agree with me that it is actually asking quite a hell of a lot of people in the Sikh community to try to assert some leadership in this, because it's so damn dangerous. I mean, after the absolute clown show of Trudeau's, visit, his magical mystery tour in India, and the emergence of the fact that, well, God, what was his name again? Help me with this.
Jaspal Atwal.
Jaspal Singh Atwal
Yeah.
was, in his entourage, for God's sake. I mean, I was sort of asked to write, what the hell is all this about? So, I wrote a couple of pieces about about Jaspal Atwal and who he is and his history and the charges against him and the bad things that he did and how, it was all very fascinating and hilarious as a political story. But I also couldn't avoid talking about the murder of a friend of mine, Tara Singh Hare, who, when this started, it's all, it's like a different world, he was the editor of the Indo-Canadian Times. For sort of staking out a semi kind of independent position from the Khalistanis, there was an assassination attempt. He was in a wheelchair, and then I guess 3 or 4 years later they finally killed him. But just for writing that story, okay, this is what we're talking about here, kids. This is who Jaspal Singh Atwal really is, and this is why the government of India would be a little bit upset. They'd find it a little bit untoward that the Prime Minister of Canada, for God's sake, would have this guy in his entourage just for writing these. I mean, I didn't take any position, didn't sort of stake out any political standpoint. I had the World Sikh Organization demanding that I be fired. From I was writing for Maclean's at the time, but also from the National Post. I write a column for the National Post. And I mean, really viciously insisting that I was a racist and that I was inciting racism against the Sikh community. Just by just saying, this is what happened. This is what it's all about. And then they brought somebody over from Britain, toured the country with this guy saying what a terrible person I was. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard to take these guys on.
Yeah, most people don't want to. I mean, Balraj Diol, we discussed earlier, he did take him on, went public, and ended up almost dead at the hands of 5 guys, including by Shahid Harjinder Para, among others, also Kulwinder Mali, another hero whose portrait is up in the Gurudwara, that one in Moulton in Ontario. What we have is a situation where apparently learning isn't happening. I said earlier, we've got to get a start. We've got to stand up and educate people and make people understand what the truth is about these matters. Well, look at the case that has just been mentioned, the case of Jaspal Singh Atwal. This was a guy who was, I mean, he was on the front page. I mean, he at the time in 1986, when he and 3 other men tried to assassinate a Punjabi cabinet minister, Malkiat Singh Sidhu, on a back road on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And he confessed. He told his parole officer, "I was the shooter. I was the one who pulled the trigger." Sidhu survived, by the way, but was later assassinated, I guess, about 5 years later. Anyway, the point of the story is that the Liberal Party of Canada, the natural governing party in their own minds of Canada, completely normalized Jaspal Atwal's presence in Liberal Party politics. He was on the Liberal Party executive in one of the ridings in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. And when his name was proposed as a guest at a glittering diplomatic reception at the High Commissioner's residence in New Delhi for the Prime Minister Trudeau and his wife, nobody thought that, well, that's not going to look good. The Indians might not like it if a convicted Khalistani terrorist is at the dinner dining with the Prime Minister and distinguished Indian guests. Nobody thought that. I mean, it's incredible. Like they didn't think of that. It's almost hard to believe. But no, nobody learns. Nobody learned that is not going to end well. And of course, all we had to see was the picture of him and Mrs. Trudeau, and of course, the lid blew off that trip, and it became an absolute diplomatic disaster with attempts being made by the government which failed to suggest that, oh, well, it was all cooked up by shadowy rogue elements in
Of
the
the
Indian government. It was
yeah,
their fault.
yeah,
The Indians did it. They engineered
yeah,
this
yeah.
invitation. I mean, it was absolute nonsense and lies. But my only point, where I'm adding, I hope, to what Terry has just said, is that there are. It's very hard to teach people, and they don't seem to have got it in that case. I mean, what more do you want than this guy was convicted as a terrorist on the front pages of the newspapers, and here he is dining with the prime minister? What's hard about that? What, this is not a difficult concept to
Yeah.
grasp, that this is going to be a diplomatic catastrophe.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to what we mentioned earlier, Terry, you had mentioned earlier about Canadian politics having a lot of, I hate to use the word, but, infiltrated by these Khalistani elements to such an extent that it's really part of the body politic and not in Canada's interests, not in the interest of Canadians.
Can I just add one thing, though? And just on the other side of the question, I'm sorry to go on, but remember that you can also get elected, apparently, in Canadian politics by saying no to these people. It's I don't know why politicians are so afraid of the Khalistanis, because I mean, Ujjal Dosanjh was elected and re-elected for 20 years in British Columbia as a die-hard opponent of the Khalistanis in a heavily Sikh riding. Tara Singh Hayer's son, Dave Hayer, was elected, I think, for 11 or 12 years in British Columbia as a provincial member of the legislature. And he still lives and prospers in Surrey. We're afraid, apparently. Some politicians are afraid, but they don't need to be. Lots of pro-India members of the Indian diaspora in Canada do get elected to Parliament.
May their tribe increase. So, when we talked, when Terry, you mentioned that, a lot of Sikhs are afraid to, speak up because of the violence that is inflicted on them. I just wanted to mention the Rangrez family in the UK who, at this time, they're in hiding under UK police protection because they released some TikTok videos that used humor. Nothing nasty against the Khalistanis, but just some humor to oppose them and their ideology. And because of that, the threat to them and their young daughter is so massive that the UK police are now providing them protection and they're in hiding. This is happening now. This is still happening, and maybe that's why a lot of people aren't speaking up. I just wanted to mention their name and their situation. We have a lot of hands that are up, so we'll go to questions. I do want to give a chance to Gurkirat Singh. I know Gurkirat Singh. I just want to introduce him to the panel. Gurkirat, I know you have been with Amritpal in Punjab for a few months, and you're part of his team. Everybody knows Amritpal is a fugitive who, attacked a police station and with guns and swords, and threatened the Home Minister of India, and also in many videos has released calls for the genocide of Hindus and usual talking points of the Khalistanis. And I believe Gurkirat knows him well and is part of his team in some way. But if you're not, you can feel free to correct me as well. But Gurkirat, we'd love to hear from you. We don't want this to be an echo chamber, but go ahead and speak. But please keep it brief. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Being a Canadian, I had the opportunity to go to Punjab, and I wanted to document what was happening on the ground in Punjab, because what I was seeing from the national media and the local Punjab media didn't represent what I saw happening there. You mentioned that Amritpal Singh called for a genocide against Hindus. I was with him for about 3 months, and not once did he mention that to me or call for that. He actually had Hindus who were staying with him at his de-addiction centers, and he was helping them get off drugs. There's actually Hindus with him when he went to Ajnala at the situation that took place there at the police station. Hindus were coming out and supporting him of Punjab and Muslims when he was taking out his cause of hate and going from village to village. So this narrative that Khalistanis are against Hindus, that's not true. I've been in Canada. I have many friends who are Hindus. I got family from my own villages in Punjab who are Hindus. And Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims of Punjab get along very well and have gotten along very well. This is a narrative that's been spread throughout the years which is very untrue. Yes, there might be small sects of Hindu nationalists that are speaking against Hindu nationalists or RSS, or you have
I'm sorry,
people.
Gurkirat, is there a question
Yeah,
in there?
you
Or
asked me. You asked me to
seems
speak.
like it's a long
I'll ask.
statement.
I'll ask Terry. I have a question for Terry. My
Yeah, please
question
go
for
ahead
Yeah,
and
let's
ask your
hear the
question.
question. Please make sure there's a question in
Yeah,
what you're asking. Yeah.
my question is for Terry. My question for Terry is this: Terry, you're a reporter. How do you feel about India suppressing freedom of speech when you have 27 million people whose internet is cut, and then you have reporters who have nothing to do with Amritpal who are rounded up and picked up, and then you have people who have nothing to do with any of the situation going on who are not a part of Amritpal's entourage, around 400 officially and
Okay, Gurkirat,
unofficially
I'm sorry, but
2,000
I
people
have to cut
that are
you off
rounded up.
because
Yeah,
you
this is
are
amusing.
making us.
I,
But
I'd
yeah,
I'd be happy to
let me
take a
answer.
shot at answering that if he wants me to.
Yes, please go ahead, please.
Okay, first off, I'm very, very, very suspicious, always very, very suspicious about any kind of rhetorical question that is put at length that contains the word narrative. I'm not interested in narratives, okay? And I think, this is about what I'm being asked here is what do I believe? What is my standpoint? How do I justify my beliefs based on all of this lovely, unicorns and flowers that I'm hearing from my interlocutor here? This isn't about what I believe. This is all. I don't know what to believe half the time. It's what I know. This is about what I know, what I've always known, and I think my brother Terry has accumulated quite a bit of knowledge as well, and to imply that by simply recounting what we know, that we are somehow feeding into a narrative, and that that we have to justify our standpoint on the Modi government's absolute disregard for civil liberties and human rights in India. I'm a senior fellow for the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. I don't think there's anybody in this country who's more closely associated with the cause of rescuing Syrian refugees than I am. I think I've got my credentials in this area fairly well established, and I don't need to sort of engage in a counter narrative. And that's actually not what journalism is for. If you get your head out of this idea of a narrative, I think, and you just deal with the messy complexities of the real world and facts, you'll have a much, much clearer understanding of how we've ended up here after half a century.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. Terry, you have something to add?
I'm only going to say that my word that I don't like is whataboutism. I don't like questions that, well, what about the Indians being terrible people and cutting the internet for 27 million people, which, by the way, they have not done. And I mean, it's just changing the subject. I'm not in favor of the suspension of civil liberties or the abolition of the internet. I'm not in favor of terrible things happening. The subject here is the Khalistan movement, and I have already said that I'm in favor of allowing the Sikhs to have a referendum if they want, and let them vote. And that's something that the Indian government wishes I would not say. I'm not afraid. I don't mind criticizing all sides if I have an opinion. But I don't think that wipes out anything that anyone has already said. I don't think that wipes out. I don't think it's a comparable thing to say that, well, the police have been heavy handed in pursuing this guy who brought his private army to attack a police station and spring one of his fellow gunmen. I don't think that's comparable with the atrocities that we have been discussing in this space, to include the Air India bombing and much besides. The Khalistan movement has an association with blind, wanton, hideous terror for a good reason. They are guilty of it, and it's not, and we are not stopped somehow from saying that because you think the Indian government has been too harsh in closing off mobile internet to us, at least some people in Punjab, in pursuit of this person who challenged the state with the force of arms.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I just want to quickly add one correction to what Guru Kirat, who was on stage a little while ago, he was saying that Amritpal has never called for a genocide of the Hindus. He's on record calling them parasites, and we know, where that goes. Anyhow, we've got some new speakers, and we have some old hands up. Prabhajit has his hand up for quite a while, so let's go to him. Go ahead, Prabhajit.
Thank you very much. My question, of course, is to both Terrys and Terry Milewski and Terry. And I believe, through whatever knowledge that I could come across, that the Indian state, when it was established in 1947, that it's supposed to give some kind of freedom to Sikhs in India, so that they can establish their way of life, their religious rights, their political rights, free from the Indian state. So that is my understanding, that the leaders at that time promised the Sikhs that after 1947 they will have some space. Um, but the Indian elites or the British elites before them did not want that to happen, and and I believe that the British elites and after that 1947 the Indian elites, they were basically anti-Sikhs because they did not give them the freedom. They did not give them the freedom for their religion. They did not give them the freedom for their political
Yeah,
organizations.
Prabhajit, what is the question, my friend?
Yes,
Do you have a question in there
yeah.
somewhere?
If you can give me, if you can give me,
No, you get to ask the question.
yes,
You don't get to make a speech here. Ask the
yes.
question,
I'm
please.
asking the question. So just give me 1 second, please. And
You take 2 seconds, but ask the question.
Only question, Prabhjit ji, please, because we have other people waiting in
There are
line.
a lot of
yes,
hats raised. I
yes,
mean, you don't get to make a speech here. Please ask your
yes.
question.
I'm asking the question, sir. So I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and to do. I want to have freedom, and I really, really appreciate that Terry has said that in Canada, I have the freedom. Just like there is a Quebec nationalism in Canada, uh, so there is a Sikh nationalism, and we have the freedom. Now, they are not small minority, as Terry has been saying, and many of you has been saying. I was in Brampton and
Sorry, Prabhjit.
I was in
Prabhjit ji, I
Brampton.
have to stop you. I'm so sorry. I'm going to give you one more chance, Prabhjit ji, to ask a question. We want to be respectful of everyone's being asked to ask a question. We heard you. We understand where you're coming from, but please ask a question. One more chance, Prabhjit ji. Go ahead. It's just frame it as a question, what you want to say.
Yes, please give me some time here. Uh,
No, sorry, sir. We can't.
No,
what I'm saying is, I was
Prabhujit,
in
I'll have
Brampton,
to move you
and
down. Yeah, I believe he doesn't have a question. Terry, do you have any comments for
I
what
was
he
only
said?
going to say, well, he declared that it's not a small minority. There has been a fair, universally accepted vote on the uh, Amritsar splinter group, the Simranjit Singh Man's splinter group of the Shiromani Akali Dal party, the only separatist party running in recent Punjabi elections, in which they won 2.5% of the vote last year, and in 2017 they won 0.3% of the vote. This is a microscopic share of the vote. They won no seats. He has a federal seat, yes, but in the Punjabi elections, the last two that I remember, I've examined the results of those elections, and the support for the Khalistan movement has been almost imperceptible, to the point that Nota, none of the above, did better than the separatists. In the most recent election last year, a Hindu nationalist party, the BJP, a Hindu nationalist party in a Sikh majority state where 58% of the population are Sikh, did better by almost 3 times than the separatists. The BJP beat the separatists by far. And they say it's we've had a referendum. We've had a vote. What's wrong with these numbers?
Absolutely. And every time there's an election, it's a referendum essentially, and people vote over and over again, and it's the results are quite clear. Um, let's go to DJ. DJ has got his hand raised up, and then we'll go to some other speakers after. Go ahead, DJ. Ask your question and be concise, please.
Thanks. I appreciate you sharing the stories of the past experiences, Terry. And Terry, for some of the other speakers I've heard, I would be cautious to believe much of what's stated here is fact. I think it goes without saying that there aren't ghettos in Canada. Brampton and Surrey being two of the largest success stories of immigrant communities in the West, both economically, culturally, and politically. I liked how you mentioned diplomatic disaster. And I think that's fitting both for the democratic disaster, which India, I think, kind of is, right? Back to my question. I'd like to ask you both, as Western lead journalists reporting on the matter historically, in today's era, with the evolving media and the truth being very challenging to hide for any government, much more than it was in the 80s. What's your view on the existence of the corruption in Indian media that's been, exposed time and time again by various, government and non-government agencies, both nationally and internationally? On, just to touch on that, like the paid news is almost modus operandi in
Yeah,
India.
I think we got your question. What's Terry's view on
Well,
corruption in Indian media?
is sort of outside my area of expertise. I'm not an expert on the Indian media. I merely appear on the Indian media quite frequently lately because people call me to chat about Amritpal Singh, and they ask a series of questions, and then they have a panel which interrupts you, and not much light is
Right.
shed. So I'm a big fan of Indian media because it seems to be very entertaining, and it's lots of fun, and they do some great editing where they introduce you with pictures of tanks and bombs and guns, and then here's Terry Milewski to talk about it. I didn't bomb anybody. I'm not an authority, though, on corruption, as you put it, in Indian media, and I don't think anyone who living with the Western media at this point in history is in a position to point fingers at India.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for answering that. And
So
just to touch on it, Terry, what I wanted to ask was, the government of India has been identified as, by the World Economic Forum and the Edelman Report is the second most corrupt media in the world. And I think it's being degraded to almost paid commercial advertising at this point, right? The threat of
that's not
maligning
true.
a
That's not true.
diaspora of a religious minority and its effects can be obviously damaging
DJ, I'm
to
going to
as a
stop
whole.
you because you're not asking a question. You're doing your propaganda here. And I know you're speaking really quick because you want to get all the points you have written down in. It's quite obvious. In fact, I can speak a little bit about Indian media. Indian media is part of some indices that do show badly. But if you look at the index that allows for freedom of journalists and the least amount of danger to journalists' lives, India is ranked number one. And if you look at Western media or any other media as well, a lot of them do function in a way that is part of, their nationalities, their nations need to put out the right information. And every country has a right to do that. So does India. But Indian media is not one monolith, as you are representing here, DJ. Indian media consists of not just English, but also vernacular media is one of the largest media groups in the world. We have massive amounts of media in every regional language, every sub-regional language, print, radio, as well as television. And between all of this, there is a massive amount of free speech. There are organizations, there is media that is completely dedicated to be anti-establishment at any point of time since 75 years. So this is, the propaganda that all media functions as a private property of someone. That's not true, and anyone who is in the media space in India can attest to that fact. Yes, there is media organizations that do parrot political things for one side versus the other, but you find it on all sides as well. I'm not fully defending the Indian media, but this propaganda that they're all bad is also completely incorrect. It is not. It's not a monolith. That is the most important point to take. But I didn't want to go on that, but I wanted to clarify that point. Baji, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you for giving me a chance. So my question is actually to Terry Glavin. I was listening to him, and he was saying that I think he's the one of those, who had a chance once to meet Bindrawali, the terrorist. So actually, when he said it, he had this monologue of like, flying and killing Hindus. I wanted to hear more on that. Actually, we touched so many points. So especially the newer, younger generation, they should know about this terrorist more than anyone else. Thank you.
Well, it was a strange encounter. I think it was 36 train stations had been burned down or blown up the night before. Getting into Punjab was not easy. It was closed off. We sneaked in. We took the train pulling out at midnight. It was making all these milk stops on the way, and it was filled with mostly farm workers from UP who the Rabi harvest was coming on. And there was a riot in the train station in Delhi just as the train was pulling out. I think that's why we weren't noticed. So we got into Delhi into Amritsar. And I just sort of presented myself. I mean, I think there were some people there who knew me or knew of me. And I had a very peculiar encounter with, I guess it was the Dashmesh Regiment people. And their compound, it was sandbag gun emplacements at the four corners of each story, and a kind of an anti-aircraft, what do you call that, Terry?
Emplacement.
Hey, there it is, yeah, on the roof. And so in my encounter with Bindranwala, I wish I had my notes from that time in front of me. I mean, it was very disturbing, actually. It was because it was just me and this little Icelandic guy who, I mean, I can kind of pass as Punjabi, but this Icelandic fellow, he had a bit of a hard time, quite pallid, as you might imagine. And we just, we were made to stand in a courtyard below the Akal Takht, and we had to take off our shoes and so on, and it was really, really hot. And you had these guys with submachine guns pointing at us, really getting amused. They found it funny, and I thought, well, you might find this funny, but I don't. And so one of the things I've discovered in dealing with tough guys, whether it's in places like Syria or Afghanistan or anywhere really, is to either act like a complete idiot and get away with it because, oh man, this guy's just a complete idiot, or just don't back down, just stand up to them. And so I just said, okay, well, I've had it. I'm going upstairs now. And I sort of barged past them, and I think, we finally got upstairs to it's a lovely place, actually, kind of open to the elements, under a roof, and you're sitting comfortably. And then we had lunch, and it was just this barrage of semi-literate, hateful rubbish about Hindus, and also mocking us as well. And because I was clean shaven at the time, and And so, you know, he was going on about, oh, you know, are you a Hindu or a Christian and all this sort of thing. But, you know, there's absolutely no way that you can characterize Bhindranwala. It was impossible for me to characterize Bhindranwala in any way that would put him in a favorable light. You know, he completely, you know, I would ask about the idea of Khalistan and an independent India. And the way he would answer questions like that was, well, of course, you know, the Hindus are going to give it to us. So why would we say no? So, you know, I mean, this is the kind of thing, you know, you just leave something, an encounter like that, and it's quite chilling. It's quite chilling because this is not some Che Guevara personality. You know, this is not, you know, this is not some brave leader of a third world liberation movement. I'm sorry, you know. He was a very nasty man. Very nasty man. And, you know, happy to be brutal and violent and intimidating to people. And that's, you know, I mean, I wish I could be, you know, what I say when I cover these things or when I write about what happened back then doesn't leave the Khalistani movement looking so horrible. But I'm afraid the facts, that's what the facts reveal, is it was a terrible time for ordinary, decent people in Punjab, Sikh or Hindu, Muslim. It was a very, very bad time. And it was a time of some terror. If I were a local journalist in Punjab, and if I had written, and, you know, the way I wrote for about Bhindranwala for the Globe and Mail, I would have feared for my life. In fact, I probably wouldn't have survived. And so I think it is really, you know, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes into, you know, when you go up King George Highway, go to, you know, any of the great Gurudwaras around here. There really is this new generation that has an understanding of Bhindranwala and of Parmar and of all of those guys that is absolutely the opposite of reality. It's a funny thing.
Terry Glavin, have you ever thought about writing a book about this, your interaction with Bhindranwala, your visit to Punjab, and I think something like this should be recorded to set the record straight in the history, right? Because this terrorist has been turned into a saint, like
Yeah,
I mentioned
yeah.
earlier, right?
Well, I have. I mean, I haven't written it in book form, but, you know, I have written at length you know, on, you know, for the Globe and Mail, for Maclean's magazine. I did a series for Vancouver Sun, in, you know, describing in fairly colorful and explicit detail the emergence of the Khalistani movement and the rise of Bhindranwala and the terror of Talwinder Singh Parmar. And I mean, it's all there. I don't know what else I can write. And I have to also confess that, you know, part of my difficulty is that I really did start to bail consciously, try to get away from it after the Kanishka. You know, that really had an effect. And I don't, you know, part of it is, and I'll never be able to sort of be really completely objective or disinterested when I'm writing about you know, the militant Khalistanis, because those 329 people, you know, they were my people. They're my people. That's what happened. And they were taken out of the sky and they were drowned in the ocean. And you know, I can't think of it any other way. And I'd like to be nice and neutral and sweet and to these fellows, these Khalistanis who claim that you know, well, it wasn't really Talwinder Singh Parmar. Maybe it was the Indian government that did it. Oh gosh, we really don't know. I mean, the ridiculous things that Jagmeet Singh was saying to my brother Terry in that CBC interview, when all Terry Milewski was trying to do was get a straight answer out of Jagmeet Singh, and he refused to give it. You know, and it's imagine somebody who had been, you know, elected the leader of the Democratic Party in the United States, and he said, "Well, we're really not sure who killed Kennedy. You know, I don't know about this Oswald fellow. Could have been the CIA, and yet we're supposed to tolerate this." And if you challenge it and you say, "Well, you know, are you sure you want to, you know, just draw him out a little bit more?" Milewski gets accused of being this horrible racist. You know, it's. I wish I could share Terry's enthusiasm about the idea, and I think I kind of do, about, you know, telling the truth and leadership and people getting out in front of this and saying, you know, we're not going to be bullied and intimidated into this. Thank you. No, that's enough. And you raised Ujjal Dosanjh. Ujjal, you have to remember, has a base in the old left. The trade union left, the NDP, very, very, you know, vigorous tradition in British Columbia. And I don't even know if that left is there anymore. I don't know. I think it's kind of disappeared. So anyway, that's all I have to say. And I have terrible bronchitis, and I really apologize for my voice. But I think I better go and have some hot tea.
Hey Terry, yeah, we absolutely appreciate you hopping on and giving us your insight. This is just absolutely fabulous. These are stories that people have never heard. So great to have you on here. I see Shamsher's been laughing for quite some time. Shamsher, is there something itching you so much that you have to kind of get out? So
Yeah,
can
I,
you ask?
obviously
I
this
Yes,
is
just
like
before
ask.
Shamsher goes,
a mad
before you
echo.
go, Shamsher, before you go, I wanted to check with Shamsher. There is a video of I think it is you talking with Jagmeet Singh on a panel about using violence as a way, as a legitimate way to achieve your fascist theocratic goals. I believe it's you. If it's not, please correct me. But yes, with that, I wanted to. That's linked up there. If anybody wants to watch Shamsher in action, this is who he is. So, with that, Shamsher, please restrict yourself to a question. We are not looking for monologues from you. Thanks.
Yeah, obviously this is like an echo chamber, so it's not a forum for discussion. I don't actually have a question for any of these guys or yourselves as the hosts. I've pinned a publication at the top that debunks Terry Milewski's claims around the familiar Indian narrative that's been sold about Khalistan being a project of Pakistan.
Here's the narrative again.
Well, obviously, it's a narrative that's been propped up by the Indian media. This whole dismemberment theory that's actually rooted in a CIA disinformation campaign to discredit the
Oh,
Soviets, and it's all the details are in there. But you need a bit
Did
more.
you write it, Shamsher? Did you write it,
It's written by the
Shamsher?
Khalistan Center. Yeah, I was involved in its publication.
So you are the author debunking multiple international agencies and accredited investigative journalists. You
You
are the
should read
author
the
of that.
publication. I know that's
I mean,
probably not your
it says everything.
forte to actually look at factual information from a perspective of not
Bro said
bias.
we're in an echo chamber and then linked an article that he wrote himself.
You are in
Amazing.
the echo chamber, and
Amazing.
the echo chamber is that of upholding the logic of Indian nationalism.
Okay.
So
So
when you're
I'm going
talking
to
about,
no you. Okay, wait, Shamsher, relax.
sorry,
So I'm going to
when
give
you're
Terry
talking,
Milewski. Wait, Shamsher.
finish. I haven't
Shamsher,
finished my point.
please be patient.
Yes,
Be
I haven't.
patient.
Shamsher, I think we heard you. Thank you very much. Let Terry respond now.
Exactly.
You haven't actually heard anything that I've said. I haven't actually made my point or even asked a question.
You made an accusation, so I think you made that
Let
quite
let
clear.
let Terry answer.
So
Obviously, you don't have a
absolutely.
question. We asked you to ask a question. You didn't have a question. You made a statement.
Why
Yeah,
don't
thank
Terry?
you for
Why
your
don't you
views.
go
Let's.
away and read that report?
Okay, I've moved him down. I might bring him up if required. But yeah, Terry, any comments on what he said? Terry M or Terry G?
Which Terry M, I think, is the one that
Yeah,
would.
Terry, that's what he. Yeah, Terry, if you're here.
Terry, maybe your mic isn't working because we can't hear you. Terry Milewski, we can't hear you. You might have to log out and log back in. I mean, Terry, we still can't hear you. So,
Yeah, maybe he's also not able to hear us. Let me just
yeah.
move him to the speaker and move him to the audience and then bring him back.
Okay.
Yeah, Terry, I'm moving you to the audience and I'll bring you back up right away. So just bear with me for a second.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, for someone like Shamsher who runs his own little center in the UK, right, puts out accusations against, international agencies that work together to stop terrorism around the world, and investigative journalists who have cut their teeth over decades, to, I mean, it's just hilarious. I'm just,
Yeah, I'm adding
I'm
Terry
happy
again.
to hear these words.
Hopefully, you'll. Terry, can you hear us?
And now I hear you. For some reason,
Oh,
everything went
okay,
dead for a
perfect.
while. Now I hear you, and I take it you can hear me. I
Yeah.
apologize. I don't know what happened.
No, it's Twitter has some glitch. Yeah. Go ahead. You heard him.
Did you hear Shamsher, Terry?
Sorry, no, I did not. No. Who was that?
Okay.
Was that Shamsa Singh?
Yes,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Yeah.
guy from UK who talked about violence as a legitimate way of establishing a theocratic fascist state in another country, on another continent, while Jagmeet Singh nodded his head in agreement. The very same Shamsher made some accusations against you and pinned up some report that he wrote himself that he says debunks everything that you have
Well,
said. Um,
I'm sorry I missed him. That's too bad. It suddenly went dead. I didn't hear a thing. And now that
oh,
he's over,
Shamsher,
it's all come back. That's terrible. I would have liked to hear that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Shamsher, if you're still there, please do come up. I
Yeah.
mean,
Shamsher. Yeah. Please come up. I can't see him. Maybe some of his friends who are here. We're gonna give him one more chance. Please invite him back. Yeah. Meanwhile, I don't know, Terry G. You have any
Well,
comments on what that guy said?
I didn't hear what he said here. I have read an article by him in which he pretends to debunk everything I ever said, and without ever offering any reason to believe that. The article is one of those sort of rambling political screeds. Um, which avoids all the important points and misses all the points that I've made. I really don't know what the point of it was. The whole article, it didn't debunk anything I've ever said, really.
it's the same article, Terry. He's only ever written one article.
It was published, I think, by the Khalistan Center.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah, I have read it. It's just a rambling piece of nonsense, really. I mean, it's not worth. There are people here who want to talk about the real issues, and I wouldn't waste much time on it. I didn't find it very interesting. It was a struggle to read it.
Thank you, Terry.
Well, yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, it was quite hilarious. Yeah, he pinned up his own article, and that's his proof of debunking Terry. We got some hands up. Let's go to Duke. Duke has been up for a
No,
while, so
Indian Tool was up first.
okay.
Can you go to
All
Indian
right.
Tool? Then we go
We
to
go to
yeah,
okay.
Duke and Utsav. Yeah.
Good day, everyone. My question is that Khalistanis have come into the Canadian, particularly Canadian discourse and public life, and they're getting more and more stronger. The strength lies in the loopholes of the immigration system, wherein they can come and seek asylum and cite some sort of a danger back in Punjab. So what these politicians are doing, it's self-admitted by the leader of SADA, what Terry M was referring before, that he issues these sort of letters for $500, and he has issued around more than 50,000 letters, and on those basis, these guys are claiming asylum and in particularly Canada. So UK has taken some steps to, on a broader perspective, of course, to contain these sort of asylum. So, will Canadian government act on this? Or they should act on this and not create all these constituencies, because these guys, when they get these sort of asylums, they make a constituency, and that's the precise reason the politicians like Jagmeet Singh, they're harboring and probably encouraging as well. So, if someone wants to take this question on, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and we should thank Puneet Sahani for finding this interesting bit of an interview, which he published the video of Simranjit Singh Mann himself happily admitting that, oh yeah, anyone who has got the money will send you a letter certifying that you are a persecuted member of my separatist party, and that therefore you should qualify for asylum in whatever Western country you want to enter. Um, uh, uh, Puneet did add, by the way, something I didn't know until he added it, that the 50,000 figure was for successful customers, not just all customers. Those were just the ones that did succeed in getting asylum or getting a visa wherever they wanted to go, having paid for this letter, uh, paid cash for this letter. I think we shouldn't exaggerate, though, the willingness of Western governments to let people into their countries just because they've got a letter. Typically, they will need more than that. They'll need a job offer, show they speak English or a bit. It varies among countries, and it even varies depending on where you apply, when you apply, whether it's a Monday morning, and so forth. There are many, many variables. But suffice to say that at some level, it doesn't hurt your chances if you've got an important looking letter from an eminent party leader with a federal seat. Remember, he is a member of parliament in India, and it can't hurt. So it's going to be of interest, I suspect. You asked me if they should pay attention. I think they will. I think that governments everywhere will take a look at that and think, so the reason they got this letter is not because of any other reason, but they just had the cash. They paid for it, and they might take a second look at an application which has that, but not much else. Let's put it that way.
Can I ask, has this little racket been successful in Canada for applicants?
It's a good question. I mean, I wish I knew, because it's
I
very,
don't
very
know
hard
either.
to discern how they say, oh, it's all privacy, and you're not supposed to
Oh,
know
it's terrible.
how these things work, are you? I mean, it's this is all internal government business, and it's not a very transparent process. And people, you can tell stories about how you got into the country that aren't true, and nobody's going to know. So maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. In some cases, I doubt that they worked in all cases. That you just have to just produce the letter, and Simranjit Singh Mann suddenly he's got some open sesame key to the immigration process in Germany and the UK and Canada. I don't think so. I don't think it's a magic bullet, but I do think it helps.
Yeah, I think something that would be useful for people to understand is the opacity of the citizenship and immigration system in Canada. We just the latest is we brought in 1 million people last year, and the curious thing is, as Cherry says, when you ask questions about cases, the next thing is, you'll get a little, well, we can't say anything about it because of the Privacy Act, and I was looking the other day. I was curious to know about with the stroke of a pen, the immigration minister, Ian Fraser, I guess it is, had changed the regulations such to allow. There's about four or 500,000 international students in Canada, and in the stroke of a pen, okay, you can all work full time now. You're allowed to work full time. And that's fine. I mean, unemployment isn't a big issue in Canada, but it's just a little odd when you go and look in Statistics Canada and also Immigration Canada about, well, how many people are actually illegally working in Canada? And there's a new definition, there's a new term. We don't use the language illegal working or something anymore. I think it's out of contract workers or something. And the federal government itself will admit that they do not know. It's somewhere between 20,000 and 500,000. So when you start, boiling it down to, back in the day, one of the things that was curious about Parmar is that he was, a wanted terrorist in India, but he'd kind of ingratiated himself with a certain section of the Gurudwara population in Metro Vancouver, and he was flying in and out of Germany and raising money and sending it back to India. I remember talking to his people in India, and they said, "Oh yes, well, when Talwinder tells us to kill someone, and we just go and kill them, and we've lost count. We just expect the Indian government to keep track." So Canada's always been really, really lax on these kinds of things, and one of the difficulties, I'm covering the story of the Chinese state and its interference operations, its influence operations in Canada. It's been a preoccupation of mine actually for about 15 years now, because I actually, I tend to associate with Uyghurs and with democracy activists and Hong Kongers and Tibetans and so on. And nobody really understands the community. This is the biggest problem we have, I think, is that the broad Canadians don't know one another as well as they used to. We used to understand basically who the Sikhs were and what they were about, and people, we got along. Everything. It was messy, and you'd get rednecks and racists from time to time. But you look at the Chinese community, and there's no such thing. There's 1.8 million people who identify as Chinese in one way or another in Canada. And only, I'm going to say, was it 10 years ago? It was 1.3 million. So, there's 500,000 people from basically from mainland China that have emerged in the diaspora communities across the country over the last 5 or 10 years. And they are nothing like, we used to call these Chinese Canadians. Well, I don't even know if they really talked about themselves that way. The people who built this country, the Chinese who built this country, built the damn railroads, worked in the mines and the canneries and so on. They were Taishanese from 5 counties at the mouth of the Pearl River Delta. That's it. And then you get the Hong Kongers who started coming in when, because of the fear of the handover. And about, I'm going to say the 80s, Cantonese took over as the main language in the Chinese diaspora communities. And only 2 years ago, it's now Mandarin. And these are completely different people. They are multi-millionaires. They all drive McLarens and Ferraris and Lamborghinis. And they are intimate with the United Front Work Department. They're the sons and daughters, they're princelings of the Chinese ruling class. And so, I think this is a difficulty that the media has, the news media has, in general, in covering politics within diaspora communities, is that, there's the kind of Wikipedia version of say, Punjabis and Sikhs in Canada. And then there's the sort of reality of what's been happening in the last 10, 15 years. So I don't know exactly the point I was making there, except that it's complicated. And, the influence of the established Sikh community in federal politics, they're well represented, done very well for themselves. I think they're overrepresented statistically. And it's hard to mess with these guys. It's hard to say, we really need to deal with the difficulties that Canada is presenting to the stability and unity of the Republic of India.
In the case of
Really hard.
can I just add one thing? I mean, I think a little ignorance goes a long way in matters of immigration and who is the community and who are the good guys, who are not the good guys. It's always been very difficult to figure that out. And in the case you mentioned, the case of Parmar, who was the Indian government applied for his extradition as a wanted murderer for the murder of two policemen in India way back in 1982. And that was turned down by the government of Pierre Trudeau, as it then was, on the grounds that India did not recognize the Queen as the head of state. And you're thinking, what? What the hell does the Queen have to do with it? And what kind of reason is that? Well, the answer is it's a kind of silly made up reason. The extradition treaty between the Commonwealth wasn't really properly in force in India because they hadn't recognized the Queen as head of state. It was all just bureaucratic nonsense. They needed to find an excuse why to say no to India. And they wanted to say no to India because they didn't want to be guilty of intervening in an internal Indian squabble between one bunch and another bunch. And the government was doing bad things to the Sikhs, supposedly, and that gives us pause. So we're not going to send this guy back. And the Germans then did the same thing. When he was caught in Germany, they held him on the extradition warrant, and then decided, no, we don't want to get into this. We don't like the Indians very much, and they're out to do bad stuff. So it's been very important, is my point, for the community to keep its narrative. Not a good word this evening, apparently, but their narrative was that the Sikhs are persecuted in India, and everyone's going to accept that. And so you've got to turn down extradition requests from India, and it worked. So embedding your narrative of persecution and victimhood in your intended new host country has been very important, and in that case and in many others, successful.
There you go.
So, on the topic of immigration, we've seen recent increases over the last couple of years, like you guys touched upon, right? Over 1 million in a year. So, as that number goes up, do you see these Kali's sphere of influence within politics diminishing a little bit? As there's more countering voices that are migrated into Canada?
I think they're on the run to a degree, which they're not going to admit that. But I think that the fact that we're talking about them, they're making a lot of noise, they're getting their referendum rolling, they're able to get truck rallies on TV, they can show the Khalistan flag and daub graffiti on Hindu temples and get on TV and impose their writ upon the media in the sense that they're insisting, they're constantly reaching out to media outlets to say, hey, we've got a list of approved spokesmen on Sikh issues for you. We don't want you calling other people who don't agree with us. We don't want you calling non-Khalistanis. We've got approved real Sikh spokesmen. These are the people that you should be putting on the air. And very often, news outlets don't know any better. They say, oh, okay, all right, if you're volunteering to put up spokesmen on your issue, fine. And we'll do a story saying the Sikh community feels that India is interfering impermissibly in Canadian politics. which just happened, by the way, in a report that was jointly authored by the WSO and a Muslim organization of questionable origins. So the WSO being World Sikh Organization, for those not hip to that. So that's working too. That the effort to sanitize the Rolodexes, if that's still a word, of news organizations, so that only approved pro-Khalistan spokesmen get to talk about Sikh issues as though they were somehow the representatives of the community. That's working. I mean, I had a
There is
note.
there is no such thing called Khalistan.
No,
It's
Shankar, you have to wait for your turn, my friend. You cannot speak out of turn. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll come to you.
I've made my point.
Sorry,
I've made
Terry.
my point. Go ahead, by all means.
Yeah.
Can I go, Sam?
Just 1 second, Vivek.
I think Duke was next, and then we're
Yeah,
gonna get
just
Utsav after that,
yeah.
right?
Let me make a
Yeah.
quick announcement before we go to the next one. I have a lot of requests. We will bring in everybody. Please make sure when you come to the stage, raise your hand, wait for your turn, so that we can keep the conversation civil. And ask a question. Don't make a long speech. A lot of people want to ask question. Ask. We have 2 Terrys. Please do ask a question. Don't make a statement. Make sure whatever you say, it's in a question format. We would like to get to as many questions as possible. Please cooperate with us. I think Duke was next. Yeah, Vivek, we'll come to you, man.
Yes.
Yeah, Duke.
I just think it's funny every time KSANs come up, they have to like try to sell us the product. It's like the most unsuccessful multi-level marketing scam. They have to get out as many words as they can in under a minute, otherwise we won't buy their product. To the 2 Terrys, it's very commendable that you guys are on here and the work that you guys have done over the last 20, 30, even maybe more than that. Regarding this, having lived in various cities across Canada, I know how hard it can be to speak up about these issues. My question is, I think one of you aptly put it that it's sort of like a social media diasporic obsession at this point. And it ebbs and flows within the state of Punjab itself, and then we see the sort of results of that, and then the sort of Indian media, bringing it to light. My question is, how do you think the average Sikhs and Hindus in the diaspora who want to speak up against this issue can work with people from India who want to speak up against this issue? I see it in many ways as almost 2 separate fights, but I think there is, like you said, like a Venn diagram where we can kind of work together. How do you think we can sort of work together to spread awareness?
Well, you've got to play the same game that they play. I mean, I've seen this fairly close up, this process that I just described, whereby Khalistani outlets, they don't say they're Khalistanis. They claim that, that they're representative of the Sikh community more broadly, but if you know who's who. The WSO, for example, in its constitution is a Khalistani organization. They're out for an independent Sikh state, but they don't put that there on their website. They don't advertise that. So they hope that you won't know that. And then they try to ensure, as I said earlier, that reporters go to the right places, approved by them, to get comment on the issues that we're discussing here. Now, if you want to counteract that, is your question, how do we do that? You've got to play the same game. You've got to say, excuse me, how come when I saw that story on in your paper or on your TV station, all the people quoted as saying that they're representatives of the Sikh community, they're all Khalistanis? How did that happen? What about me? Why didn't you call me? So, and this is exhausting, hard work. Most people have lives. They got to get the kids to school on time. They got other things to worry about. And these people are single-minded and dedicated, and they do a heck of a job. Give them credit for making sure that theirs is the word that emerges from their community. So if you want to counteract that, you got to get in there in the trenches and do the same thing, and make sure that the news director takes your call and gets an earful about, look, every single person that you quoted in that story was a Khalistani. How about the rest of us?
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. I'm going to drop down to listener. I just want to say before I go to all the Khalistanis in here, I think what you're asking for is just federalism. Take care, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Thank you, Duke, for your question. Next is Utsav. Utsav, go ahead, sir. Ask your question.
Mr. Milewski, it's a great honor to be in this room with you. I used to work in the Harper government and the government of Mayor Rob Ford, and I can appreciate, Canada is a long-time, strong, stable democracy, and even they have limits on secessionism. Now, I look at India, and it's not a mature democracy. It is literally in a situation where it is fighting with two nuclear-armed powers. It has a long history of dealing with secessionist movements that are armed by foreign powers. I'd like to ask you if you think it's appropriate for the government of India to call for a referendum on for secessionists, knowing full well of their long violent histories and how much foreign funding they receive.
Is it okay for India to call for a referendum? They banned the referendum.
No, I'm saying to you, you suggested that India should allow for a referendum, and I'm
Oh,
just
I see.
saying
Yeah, yeah.
within the...
Why am I stupid enough to expect?
No, you're not stupid, sir. I respect you. No,
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 no, no. You didn't
you're
say
not
that.
stupid.
I'm kidding. Uh, uh, I'm stupid, but I am also kidding. The I did argue, and I continue to argue, that it would be to India's advantage in this contest to let the Khalistanis let them have their referendum and lose it. That's why I say they would be like the dog that caught the car. If the dog actually, if he chases the car and barks, that's okay. If he catches the car, he's in trouble because he's going to get run over. And if you allow an open referendum and you look at the records of what's happened in Punjab elections and see how pitifully low the support is for an independent Khalistan, then you basically you've exposed them and you've beaten them. You've won the contest. But if you ban it and you criminalize it and you say anyone who advocates a referendum is deemed to be a terrorist and will seize your properties and so on, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, I believe, because you are giving them an excuse for failure. So, well, look, I mean, we had to fight Indian government repression. They wouldn't let us carry out the referendum. Of course, we lost.
But can you see the perspective of the Indian government in which they're saying, look, these referendum activists use violence against state institutions. If we allow for referendum, then what does it do to the rest of India? You'll have a situation where other regionalist fringe movements will say, listen, give us a referendum or else we'll kill you
Well,
all.
I'm not.
You know what I mean?
Excuse me, but I'm not suggesting for 1 second that the Indian government should allow for violence. I'm saying they should allow for a peaceful, democratic referendum. It doesn't mean that they don't come and arrest you and lock you up if you engage in violence.
Yeah,
If I
Terry.
may, if I may,
Yeah,
if
Terry,
I
go
may,
ahead.
who was asking that question?
Me.
Utsav.
It's itself, yeah.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think you were kind of asking, can we appreciate the position that the Indian government finds itself in, given all of the various, independence movements, separatist movements that arise from time to time throughout the Indian subcontinent?
Correct.
Is that
And that there's like a history of violence that that is used for the secessionist movements, and that there's a lot of violent leaders in these secessionist movements, and they would cause a precedent, a very bad precedent, if you allowed for these movements to go forth.
Yeah, and it's
right?
also
Right.
unconstitutional. I mean, my position is worse than you describe it, because it's against the Indian Constitution for the government to even contemplate any alterations to sacrifice India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So I mean, they really can't do what I'm recommending. It says I'm not bound by the Indian Constitution. The Indian government is. So I'm saying, in my opinion, this would work better, but that's because I'm a nut about democracy.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I think next is Vivek. Yeah, go ahead, ask your question.
Before Vivek asks, can I just say something? And maybe Terry already, I think Terry Milewski, you already touched upon this earlier, and maybe Utsav, I don't know if he's still in the audience, did not hear it. But every time elections in Punjab happens, it's basically a referendum because you have the Shiromani Akali Dal Amritsar, SADA, which runs on the Khalistan manifesto. So if Punjabis actually wanted to vote for any kind of separatism, that is, they have a vehicle, they have a legitimate political party vehicle that runs every 5 years on a democratic ticket, and they can vote for it. And so far the highest vote percentage they have got is 2.5% last year, because and the leader they elected, he has on his bio, Khalistani leader, I am for separatism. That's what he talks about, that's a ticket he runs on. But the only reason he got 2.5% was because another younger leader, a celebrity, was killed in an accident, and because of that he got some sympathy vote. But usually he gets less than half a percentage votes. This party that runs on the Khalistan ticket, if you actually go to Punjab and talk to the political parties, the religious organizations, the social civic organizations, institutions, Khalistan is dead, and nobody even talks about it. Nobody knows about it. There is very few groups like this Amritpal group and all. There's a few thousands of people who are very vocal, who actually do ground level activity on it. So I just wanted to make that point. I didn't want to speak too much, but yeah, please go to the next person, Vivek ji.
Hi, thank you, Sam. So I've posted also one article. It's not so much of an article, but an appeal by the Canadian Sikh Society to not restrict visa for somebody with Singh and Kaur surname. So how far is this an accurate issue that sorry, Canadians are restricting visas for Sikhs or naturalization or immigration for Sikhs in Canada? The letter states that it's almost a decade-old issue. Started in 2007.
I do apologize. My audio was breaking up. I think my AirPods are dying, and I didn't hear the question right. I didn't get it.
Should I repeat it?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So I have posted a letter on the chats from the Sikh Association of Canada, writing to the immigration, where it claims that since 2007, anybody with a Singh or a Kaur surname is restricted, or there are restrictive immigration and naturalization policies targeting towards Sikhs. Is that a correct and accurate information, or is it something which is just being claimed as a victim?
Did you say anyone with the name Singh?
Yes, anyone with the name Singh or Kaur.
I've never heard that.
That's what the letter claims.
I've never heard of any such restriction. I'm sorry, I've never heard of it.
Neither have I. There would be riots in the streets if that were the case.
I mean, I cannot believe that would be true
and I think
without
I'd be
everybody
participating
knowing about it, even me.
Yeah, I'm going to leave, everyone. Thank you. I didn't even intend to be here today. I just saw that it was on my Twitter feed, and I thank you very much. God bless everybody. I've got to go.
Take care, Terry. Bye.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much, Terry.
Terry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, we've had this room going on for quite a while, much more than we expected. We've had tremendous response, both in the back channels and the chats, the retweets, the information. We've had a host of journalists from both India and Canada and the US come through. The wealth of information, Terry Milewski, you've been able to give us, talk about, and also Terry, the other Terry. So we're so thankful. We're very grateful to hear your voices on this. These are issues that some of us know more than others, but there are a lot of younger people who don't know what happened in the 80s, who are learning about this, and there's a lot of confusion just because of the disinfo campaign, social media campaign that the Khalistanis, in some parts, they have been very successful in putting out there, as well as their grip over some of the Canadian and UK politics. So I just want to say thank you. This has been great.
Well, as long as
space.
thanks are going around, I would thank you for a very well organized Twitter space and for exercising some discipline over it. And even though it was long, it was pretty good. But I do think my AirPods are giving me a message now that we've had enough. So
I have a last. I just wanted one question for Terry, if you don't mind, Mr.
go
Terry.
ahead.
Hold
Go
on.
ahead. One last one.
Terry, it's just a yes and no question. You quoted many times. I just want to hear from you one more time. Is Pakistan ISI funds Sikh for justice? Yes or no question?
Do they fund it?
Yes.
No, I don't believe they do. They might, but I've no evidence that they do. I don't know why they would, considering that Sikhs for Justice has plenty of money that it's raised itself. I don't think they have to go to Pakistan for money. I did discuss earlier on that I thought that, the Sikh diaspora has done very well, and they seem to support Sikhs for Justice generously. I don't think there's a problem that they have to go begging to Pakistan, which, as I pointed out earlier, doesn't have much money.
Hi there. Could I just jump in for a sec?
Yeah, just a second.
Thanks.
I think Bindi Wall was here before. Bindi.
I mean,
Just 1 second.
Bindi, that's a clearly bigoted account. That's it.
So
Bindi Wall gets to ask.
yeah, he's been here for a while, so he gets to speak first. Go ahead, Bindiwa. Terry,
Oh,
only if
hi.
you have time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving the mic. So I have a question for Terry. So I put the picture of two ISI terrorists from Pakistan. So on the left, his name was Iqbal Singh, and now he changed his name to the Singh name. And on the right hand side, he's a Patrick, and he is the one who is converting Sikh into Christians in Punjab. So do you think those two are relevant to the Khalistan movement currently running in the Punjab? And my second question for Terry is, he asked for the referendum, but I am also I belong to Punjab, but now living in Canada, and does my vote also should include in the referendum because I have the right in the democracy? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first question. On the second, if you're the only requirements, as I understand it, for the referendum currently are that you be over the age of 18 and a Sikh, which is a bit problematic. I mean, we have referendums in.
Can I correct you, Terry? Can I correct you? That's inaccurate.
What?
Sorry, please don't interrupt, Terry. Sorry, Terry.
I'm quoting what Sikhs for Justice said. They're only running the referendum, so if they're wrong, that's a pity. But if the referendum were to be extended inside Punjab, if it were to be permitted, they say that anyone could vote. But outside, in the current referendum, as I understand it, the requirements are that you be over the age of 18 and a Sikh. Which is odd to a Canadian. I mean, we had referendums in Quebec, and nobody suggested that only Catholics would be allowed to vote or something like that. That it would be limited by religion. Nobody suggested that, and I think it's a extremely odd requirement.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. We have been here for more than almost 3 hours. Thank you for being so patient and answering all the questions and also sharing your thoughts.
Well, thanks for running this. It's a lot of work organizing these things, and I think you've done a great job.
Thank you, Terry. It means a lot coming from you, and we should thank V. She's the one who actually initiated this. Thank you, V, and also my co-host, Sakdeep Singh. Thank you. We would like to, maybe after a couple of weeks, if you're free, we could do another one, maybe shorter one.
Well, there seems to be a lot of interest. I'd have no objection, but
okay, awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to drop off now, and I thank you all for your attention and being so patient.
Thank you very much, Terry.
Thanks.
Thank you very
Bye
much.
for now.
Bye.
Bye.